A man and woman went to Las Vegas for their honeymoon and checked into a suite at a hotel. When they got to their room, they both detected a bad odor. The husband called down to the front desk and asked to speak to the manager. He explained that the room smelled very bad and they would like another suite. The manager apologized and told the man that they were all booked because of a convention. He offered to send them to a restaurant of their choice for lunch, compliments of the hotel, and said he was going to send a maid up to their room to clean and to try and get rid of the odor. After a nice lunch, the couple went back to their room. When they walked in, they could both still smell the horrible odor. Again, the husband called the front desk and told the manager that the room still smelled really bad. The manager told the man that they would try and find a suite at another hotel. He called every hotel on the strip, but every hotel was sold out because of the convention. The manager told the couple that they couldn't find them a room anywhere, but they would try and clean the room again. The couple wanted to see the sights and do a little gambling anyway, so they said they would give them 2 hours to clean and then they would be back. When the couple had left, the manager and all of the housekeeping staff went to the room to try and find what was making it smell so bad. They went through the entire suite and found nothing. So the maids put in new sheets, new towels, took down the curtains and put new ones up, cleaned the carpet, and cleaned the suite again using the strongest cleaning products they had. The couple came back 2 hours later to find the room still had a bad odor. The husband was so angry at this point, he decided to find whatever the smell was himself, so he started tearing the entire suite apart. As he pulled the top mattress off the box spring of the bed, he found a dead body of a woman. Me and my wife were on our honeymoon in Hawaii. We were on the island of Oahu, sitting on the beach. My wife got up to go to the bathroom, and when she got back, she told me that there was a creepy man watching her walk into the bathroom, and when she tried to walk out, he blocked her path. She only got away because there were 2 other people walking into the bathroom, so he got out of the way. I asked her what the man looked like, and she looked over, but unfortunately, she said he was gone. Our hotel was walking distance from the beach, so we got back quickly, but we made sure to report the man to a police officer we saw walking on the beach, and then we washed up before going out to eat. We ate at a fancy seafood place and did some walking around afterwards. Close to midnight, we finally went back to the room and began to wind down. Then we got a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole of the door and saw a man in a maid uniform standing outside. I opened the door and he immediately tried to let himself in. I pushed him back a bit, asking him what he wanted. He told me he left something in the room while cleaning earlier and needed to get it out. The only thing, we left the do not disturb sign on the door all day. Then I noticed he was making eye contact with my wife. My wife then screamed, "That's the man!" I didn't understand at first, but it was too late for that. The man had already lunged at me, holding my throat with one hand while reaching behind himself with another. He pulled out a knife and started swinging at me, and if it weren't for my wife coming over and smashing his face with the lamp, I would have been as good as dead. The commotion drew out all the inhabitants of the neighboring rooms. One of the women started freaking out and screaming, making the situation worse. We called the police, and so did the hotel. It turned into a huge, horrible scene, but we were just happy to be alive. We were questioned when the police arrived, and some of the other people around us claimed to have witnessed it all. We still don't know what kind of intentions this guy had, but if I had to guess, I would say he wanted to get to my wife. He must have been one very dumb person to think he would get away with something like this in such a public building. Me, my wife, and 2 kids were taking a drive all the way down to Florida from New York to go to Disney. We were in Georgia at the time, so close to entering Florida, and it was about 11 o'clock at night. I planned on finishing the drive that night just to save the money from a night at a hotel. My wife and kids were already long asleep, so I was trying to drive as smoothly as possible. On that quiet highway at 11 o'clock, there were hardly any other cars at all. In fact, I didn't see any lights until, up in the horizon, I saw 2 flashing red lights. Not police lights, more like SOS lights. I slowed down and proceeded with caution. Upon getting closer, I saw a car parked in the middle of the road, seemingly deliberately to block traffic, along with 2 cones placed on either side and 2 SOS lights flashing on the ground. Then, 2 hooded men of African American descent came from behind the car and started walking over to us. I put the car in reverse, ready to hightail it back the other way. One of the men came over to my window, and I cracked it open just enough to hear him speak. After asking him if he needed something, he said, "Yes, open the door." I shut the window, and that's when he began to reach for something in his pocket. I put the car back in drive and hit the gas. I drove over the cone and SOS light and past their car. About 1 minute later, I saw a pair of headlights coming up fast behind us. At this point, my wife was awake, confused and questioning me about the speed we were moving at. I told her not to make any loud noises before telling her that we were being followed. The car behind us began flashing its lights. And then there was a loud pop, and I felt the car losing control. I did the best I could to bring it under control, but there was a second loud pop, and the car began to drag. I told my wife to call 911, even though it was probably already too late. By now my kids were up, scared and complaining. I kept the car moving for as long as possible, but the car following us began ramming our trunk. My kids were crying, my wife was screaming at the police. I was sure we were dead. But by some stroke of luck, or more like a miracle, I heard a siren and saw red and blue flashing lights coming up in the distance behind our chasers. They veered off to the exit that we happened to be passing at that moment, and the police car followed them. I pulled over to the side of the road, took the phone away from my wife, and told the police everything. Upon inspection, I found out that our 2 back tires were blown, probably shot at, which I also told the police. 10 minutes later, a squad pulled up behind us, along with a AAA truck. They seemed rather thrilled to inform us that they caught the 2 men. Someone else had stumbled onto their little roadblock trap, but luckily managed to turn around and escape before calling the cops. When my sister was in her 20s, she was on vacation with her now husband, and one of their destinations was St. Martin. They had rented a car to get around and such. One day while doing sightseeing, they were on some side road that was rather isolated from any buildings or signs of civilization. It was a nice scenic route to take, but other than that, my sister tells me that it was a pretty dead road, so it probably didn't lead anywhere important. They eventually came up to something odd. There was the back of a car sticking out of the crops on the side of the road. As they pulled up closer, they could see it was some unbranded rusty neon blue car that had seemingly swerved into the crops. My sister's husband pulled up and stopped the car, telling my sister to wait in the car. He got out to check it out. From what my sister tells me, her husband looked through all the windows of the car for anybody at all. She watched as he then looked down and jumped back at something. She then got out of the car to see what was wrong. They both got down low to have a look underneath the rusty old car. What they saw was horrifying. There were 2 grown men with large knives in their hands, along with a bloody dead body laying between them. My sister's husband literally pushed her all the way back to the car and shoved her into her seat. The 2 men had crawled out from under the car and were now on their feet. He made it back into the car just in time to drive off down the road. They stopped at the nearest sign of civilization, making sure they weren't being followed, and called the police. Both of them seem to get uneasy when the topic is brought up, so we try not to remind them of it, but I can tell my sister has always been a bit different ever since this happened to her. I was 16 years old and the summer had just started. Our grandparents were treating the whole family to a 10-day cruise. It was a Royal Caribbean cruise, and we were going to Florida and the Bahamas. It was me, my 2 brothers, my sister and her boyfriend, my parents, my aunt and uncle, my 2 cousins, and my grandparents. I spent most of my time hanging out with my older brother, Rob, who was 20. We got to share a room together, even though it really wasn't allowed. We just claimed that our dad was staying with us in that room. So one night, me and my brother were in the nightclub of the ship. I snuck in using someone else's ship ID card. When I was in there, I noticed some older, creepy-looking man sitting by the wall, and I was sure he was staring intently at me. I made a point of moving around to see if he was really looking at me, and his head turned to face me wherever I went. I was feeling really uncomfortable, so I left right then and there. I coincidentally found my sister and her boyfriend sitting by the bar outside of the club. I sat down with them for a bit, and a few moments later, I saw the same man from in the club, now out by the bar, sitting across the room, and he was still staring at me. I looked away and pretended not to notice, but my heart was racing at this point. I contemplated whether or not to tell my sister, but I ended up not telling her. I don't know why. I left the bar and started speed walking back to my room. When I got to the stateroom halls, I was constantly glancing over my shoulder to make sure I wasn't being followed. I got to my room safely. I was extremely creeped out. I had a feeling this guy was some sort of perverted creep. I got a knock at the door, and I got a little nervous. I looked through the peephole and saw my brother, so I let him in. I did not see the strange man again until late the next night. My brother and I went with my sister and her boyfriend to one of the restaurants on board at like 1 in the morning. They weren't planning on going to sleep anytime soon, so I told them I was going to crash, and I walked back to the stateroom. But when I got there, I saw that the door to our room was cracked open a bit and the light was on. I knew for sure we shut the door when we left, and there was no chance room service was in there at an hour like this. I proceeded with extreme caution and slowly pushed the door open completely. There was nobody in the room. I checked the bathroom, but it was empty too. All of our stuff was still in the same spot that I remembered it was in. I kind of just figured maybe Rob came back to the room for some reason when I wasn't with him and forgot to shut the door, so I just went to sleep. I woke up to darkness and the feeling of something brushing against my cheek. It was a hand. I pushed it away, telling Rob to knock it off, but when I noticed, even in the dark, beyond the figure by my bed, that Rob was in his bed, I let out the most blood-curdling scream you have ever heard. Rob jumped up and turned the lamp on, and there was the man from the club standing next to me. Rob jumped on him and began throwing punches. I joined in and we took down the man. It wasn't even a minute before frantic knocking came at the door. It was my parents. My dad held down the man while we called the customer service center. They sent up 2 security workers and he was sent to the jail of the ship for the remainder of the cruise. I'm not sure what happened to him afterwards, but this has emotionally scarred me, and I don't think I can ever go on another cruise again.
During Christmas break, my friends Chris, Presto, Robert, Luke, Chase, Jamie, and Kevin were tired of just only watching football all night and decided that one day we would ding-dong ditch. Towards the end of our break, we all gathered at a pizza place and started going around town trying to find a perfect house. After we found a house, my friend Chris rang the doorbell like 5 times and we all ran away laughing. Then we did this for a second time and we all ran away laughing again. When we went back for a third time, my friend Chris again went to ring the bell and he rang it again at least 5 times and we all ran away. After this time, we thought that the people in the house were just not giving into our prank and we started to walk back to my friend Presto's house. While all of a sudden, I looked back and saw this man charging full speed at us. I told everyone to start running and I saw the panic in all my friends' eyes. Presto slipped while we were running but was fast enough to catch back up with us. We then took shelter in Presto's backyard, and we saw the man wandering around the block looking for us until he gave up. We were all scared and decided to just go home, but we wanted to do the same house again the next day. When the next day arrived, I told my friends that this time I would ring the bell because I haven't in a while. When I got up and rang the bell and we all started to run away, we all saw the man again chasing us. After we kept running and couldn't see him, we noticed that the man was now in his car speeding after us. This is when we started to split up. Me, Chase, Robert, and Kevin all ran down one block, while Luke, Jamie, and Presto ran down another. After Chase and Robert found a place to hide, Kevin and I were still running away from the man. We hid under some trees for 10 seconds, thinking we lost the man, until the man started to run over people's properties and curbs still after us. This is when Kevin started to run away and I followed him. But because Kevin had a head start, he was able to escape, and the man saw me and nearly hit me with his car while blocking my way. While the man stopped his car in front of me, I quickly took out my phone and recorded this video.
Get over here. Where were you going?
Sorry, I swear I gotta do anything.
Where were you going?
Sorry, I swear I gotta do anything.
Get in
Sir.
the car. Get in the car, you fuck!
Here you can see the man's reaction, asking me where I was going and telling me to get in his car as he was holding my head and arm but let go of my arm to open the door. While he was doing this, I took my hand and pushed his hand off my head, which gave me enough room to escape. While I was sprinting down the road, I remember seeing the man going right back into his car about to chase me again. But since I had a head start on the man, I decided to hide in a bush as I saw him speed down the block trying to find me again. Right after this, I told my friends to all run back to my house and that the man was roaming around the block trying to look for all of us. When my friends came back to my house, I instantly showed them the video and they were truly scared. To this day, I have never been as scared for my life as I was that night. Most kids who play Ding Dong Ditch are, I'd say, between the ages of 10 and 14. My friends and I, however, I guess matured a little later. We were 16, juniors in high school. We live in, I guess, what most would call the typical middle-class suburbs. Most of the houses are basic and look more or less the same. There is one house that a lot of people know about a few blocks away from me. It has an architectural style much different and more archaic looking than the rest. It had a for sale sign out front for the longest time, and I guess around a year after the for sale sign disappeared was when this story took place. We weren't sure if someone had moved in or not, as the grass never seemed to be cut. But on an uneventful weekend night, two friends and I wanted to play Ding Dong Ditch on the house. The reason we wanted to target this house was simply because it was different, and we wondered if the person potentially living in it would be different as well, aka a better reaction. When we did this, we always had each person ring the bell at least once. My friend Joel went first. He tried ringing the bell, then said back to us the doorbell didn't seem to work, so we made knocking motions. He knocked on the door really hard, then he ran for the bush next to the front door. We waited for a minute, but no answer. Joel came running back. It was my turn to go. I ran up to the front door, and instead of giving a loud knock, I banged really hard on the door. As I banged, the door pushed open just a tad, giving me a near heart attack and causing me to Olympic sprint behind the bushes in the front of the house. I crouched down in the bushes alongside Joel and Eric, expecting someone to come outside, but the door just stayed in place, open just 1 or 2 inches. I guess I banged so hard the door pushed off the latch and caused it to creep open. At this point, we were wondering if anyone was even home, let alone if someone even lived here, considering there were no cars in the driveway or parked out in the street. We came up with the really stupid idea of going inside the house, since it didn't appear anyone was inside. I was the one to kind of lead the way inside, pushing the door open quietly and creeping into the living room. There wasn't any furniture in the living room besides a couple wooden chairs and an old-fashioned center table, or coffee table I guess you'd call it, sitting in the middle of the room. Moonlight mixed with the light from the streetlights outside shone through the windows, so we could see enough if you're wondering how we saw without flashlights. We crept into the kitchen, and this was where it got gross. There was a foul odor in there, and when we opened the fridge, we realized where it was coming from. There was a bunch of old, expired, rotting things in there. The putrid smell was like a mix of long-spoiled milk and rotting meats. The fridge wasn't turned on, obviously. In our heads, this confirmed nobody could be living here, so we became a little less unnerved by the idea of someone possibly being in there as well. So with that, we decided we'd look upstairs. We were a lot less quiet now going up the stairs. There were a bunch of rooms upstairs. The house wasn't exactly tiny. All the doors were closed, so opening them was a little creepy, honestly. The three of us split off into different rooms, just seeing if anything interesting would be inside. I left from one bedroom to another one, which already had the door open, so either Eric or Joel already went inside. It was another basically empty room. It had some old nightstand in the corner, and I could see marks on the floor from where a bed used to be. Then I heard a creaking sound in the room. The room was decently sized, but I didn't see either of them inside of here. However, I did see this huge black hole in the wall opposite me. I walked closer to it. It was literally this huge hole leading into the insides of the walls. It was pitch black in there, I couldn't see anything beyond the hole. But as I got closer, I heard breathing. I already knew it was one of them waiting to scare me. I said both their names though, and they both called back "what" from different rooms. I don't have to explain what that meant, and what was going on in my head. While most people probably would have ran, I took a few steps closer to the hole out of my stupid curiosity. My two friends entered the room behind me, I guess giving me a little more confidence to step closer. I was maybe 4 feet from the hole when I thought I saw something in there. Something moving. My two friends were whispering, "What do you see?" I was dumb enough to get closer. I was probably 2 feet from the hole in the wall now, when someone's arm reached out from the darkness and started yanking on the collar of my shirt. My friends came to help, and in Joel's words, he clawed at the wrinkly, pale-looking arm until it let go. Then we bolted downstairs and out the front door. We contemplated calling the cops, but with the chance of someone actually living in there, we didn't want to basically admit to breaking and entering. We agreed to just not tell our parents or anyone about it that might get us in trouble. At a certain hour in the night, you enter a certain mental state in which you're not expecting to be disturbed by the outside world. Like, for example, hearing the doorbell or your phone ringing at 3 a.m. is something that would send shivers down most people's spines. So I guess I'll start by saying this was in July of 2020. I don't run the AC much. I tend to leave the windows open with the fan on full blast by my bed. It was very late in the night. I'd been in bed for hours, that's all you need to know. I remember waking up, but not knowing why. I thought I heard some kind of dinging sound, but I couldn't tell for sure. I turned off the fan for a minute, listened, but it didn't happen again. So I turned the fan back on and lay back down. But a few moments later I heard it again. I turned the fan off quickly this time, and then I realized it was the doorbell I was hearing. I looked at the clock and started to feel incredibly uncomfortable. Who could be ringing my bell in the middle of the night? I grabbed one of my baseball bats from my closet and made my way downstairs. I did so quietly, so that I could sneak to the window and peek outside. There wasn't anyone on the front deck. Naturally, having to defend my property, I opened the front door and stepped out onto the deck. No one in sight. Some stupid kids ding-dong ditching, what else? Though all that was going through my head was that any kids doing that at this hour were real sons of bitches. I closed the door, but I sat in the living room expecting it to happen again. I gave it a few minutes. Then as I was halfway up the stairs, I went as fast as I could down the stairs and back to the front door. I didn't catch them in time though. I wasn't about to deal with this. I got 911 on the phone and told them some little shits were ding-dong ditching my house at this insane hour. The operator wasn't really helpful though. He said it's very likely just some stupid kids and to just stop answering the door and they'll eventually give up. When I asked, he said to call back if they really don't give up, or if they go beyond ringing the doorbell. I didn't like hearing that though, it made me a little uneasy. I went back upstairs to my room and turned on the fan full blast to block out the sound of the doorbell. I heard it again over the sound of the fan, but I didn't entertain it. I just really hoped it was actually some dumb kids. When it finally seemed like they had given up, some loud sound made me jump in my bed. At first I didn't know what it was, but I looked at my window and saw that it was getting soaked. It took me a second to understand someone was spraying my window with the hose. It stopped after a few seconds. I didn't even want to move out of the bed in fear that they would hear that, even as much as I wanted to go for the phone. Then there was a voice, not of a child's. It was a deeper voice, though I can't say exactly how deep because it was someone calling up, "Hey, come outside to your shed." I wanted to be anywhere but in my house at that moment. I got up and looked out the wet window, but there was no one down there. I went for the phone and called the cops again. The same operator picked up. After telling him what just happened, he told me to sit tight and wait for an officer to arrive at my house. Then we hung up. I had a little more peace of mind now, but still, I went downstairs to the den area of my house, which is the lowest level of my house, ground level to the backyard. The back door is in the den, as is the back entrance to the garage. When I looked out the window to the shed in the backyard, I could see one of the 2 doors to the shed was swung completely open. I couldn't see into the shed, and no way was I going out there. But while expecting someone to poke their head out from the shed, I heard a light creak and noticed in the corner of my eye the back door to the garage opening. It opened in a manner that I knew it was pushed. It wasn't the wind. Looking into the dark abyss that was my garage, someone went, "Psst," to break the silence. They were inside my house. I went for the front door and waited outside in front of my house. My garage door was open. My idiot self didn't lock it, and I must have not heard it opening over the sound of the fan. A police car pulled up in front of my house moments later, and he had me wait with him while he called for backup when he realized this was a break-in case. When 2 other officers eventually came to help look around the house, I stayed outside with one while the other 2 checked the house and backyard shed. When they said it was safe to come in, I did a little searching myself before they did a police report and left. Of course, from this point on, I always make sure to remember to lock everything. This was extra terrifying for me because it started as what I hoped was just a couple kids pulling a prank, and it turned into someone literally breaking into my house. I had to call an Uber to my off-campus apartment since I had arrived with a friend who left hours before me and I didn't have my car with me. I was out in the library parking lot at 11:15 when the Uber pulled up. It was a gray Toyota Camry. The driver's name was Adam. He greeted me as normal and I sat in the back seat diagonal from him. He looked to be in his mid-40s. For the first 5 minutes of the ride, there were no words exchanged between the 2 of us. But then he started to ask me questions. His first question was if I was a student, which seemed a rather pointless question since I was just picked up from a college library. Next he asked how my classes are going, then how old I was. I didn't like that question. I lied and said I was 23 instead of 18. At this point I noticed he would constantly look at me through the rearview mirror as he spoke, and when he would finish what he was saying, he had this weird creepy smirk on his face. His questions were getting a little too personal for someone whose sole relationship with me was supposed to be my driver for 10 to 15 minutes. He asked how my dating life at school is, and as much as I wanted to just flat out ignore his question, I said it wasn't bad. I should have lied and said I had a boyfriend, but for whatever reason I didn't think of saying that. He transitioned from questions to making comments, like that he used to be a huge cheater in college and asked if I ever cheated. I nervously laughed and said once or twice. He then made it even weirder to no surprise and asked if I'd ever cheated on a boyfriend. I said no. At this point we were stopped at a red light. I tried my best to avoid looking at the rearview mirror, but I was too curious and snuck a peek. He was looking at me. He made a comment that I was very pretty. I knew it was coming eventually, and it still was incredibly creepy. I didn't acknowledge it. There were 2 minutes left in the ride when I noticed he made a left turn instead of a right turn at one of the intersections. So I spoke up and told him he went the wrong way. Then he said he knows, he just has to stop at his place real quick to get something. I asked him to please just drop me off first, but he insisted his house was a minute away. And apparently it was. He stopped in front of a house and said we're here. Then he turned to me and asked if I wanted to come in, saying he had alcohol and food in case I wanted to release some stress after studying. I didn't even know what to say. I wanted to get out of the car and run, but I was scared to. I said, please just take me home. He chuckled and said he'd be right back. He went into his house, and that was when I got out from the car and started to run. No, I didn't think he had plans to murder me, but something was off about him and the situation, and I just wanted to get out of there. Moments later, I felt my phone vibrate, and it was a message from Adam the driver saying, "You know I have your address, hot stuff." That just made me run even faster. I canceled the ride just so he wouldn't be able to contact me anymore. I made it back to my apartment in a few minutes. Running with my backpack was hard, but thank God I do my cardio. My apartment was the left side of a duplex. That Adam guy wasn't parked in front of my house by the time I got back, so I hoped maybe he just wouldn't come. I filled out a form on Uber.com titled "Report a Serious Incident with a Driver," and I just gave all the details of the trip and included a screenshot of his message threatening that he had my address. Uber contacted me the next day, stating the driver was removed from the platform and should there be any further contact, that I should contact the authorities. Well, the next night when my roommate wasn't home because she was spending the night with the guy she was talking to, there was a knock at the front door followed by the doorbell. It was like 8 to 9 p.m., so it was kind of late for solicitors or anything like that. I called through the door, "Who is it?" And a man's voice on the other side said, "I found something that belongs to you." I asked, "Who is this and what did you find?" Their response was, "Just open up, I'll show you." The voice was familiar. I looked through the window next to the door, and I saw Adam the Uber driver hiding to the side of the door like he was pressed flat up against the wall, and he was holding something, I couldn't tell what. I ran for my phone to call 911, and sparing them all the details, I just begged for police to get to my apartment immediately. But by the time police arrived in front of the duplex, the knocks had long since stopped. He was gone, at least off the front porch. But I imagine he saw the police cars in front of the house because he never returned after that. There was this whole following up with the Uber report and the police now. But since there was no proof that it was Adam at the front door, I couldn't even press charges. The semester was over anyway, the lease was up, and I moved back home for summer. I left no trace for that Adam guy to ever find me again. At least, I don't think I did. This story still haunts me to this day, almost every day. I used to be an Uber driver as my second job, usually late at night like bar closing hours. It was a Saturday night around 3 a.m. I was a couple hours into my Uber driving night, and I got a call from across town to pick someone up on a street corner. In came some guy, African-American, mid-20s, he had dreadlocks, I noticed a small tattoo on his neck, but I didn't look much longer than that. I asked how his night's going, and he just grunted. Happens, not everyone's super friendly. I confirmed the address he gave me, which appeared to be a house, and he just said yeah. About a minute into the drive, he got a little aggressive and concerned that I apparently made a wrong turn because he thought I was taking a longer route. I assured him that I was just following the route that the app was giving me, and he calmed down. Like 10 seconds later, he asked me if I'm feeling lucky, and I asked, "What do you mean?" He follows that with, "I mean, how much do you value your life, son? Nobody really values what they got." I didn't like where this was going. I responded that I appreciate my life and kids every single day. He went silent after that for a while. Then he started saying some things at such a low volume that I didn't know if he was talking to me or not. So I asked, "What was that?" And he replied, "Nothing, fool, just get me to where I gotta be." I asked, "Where is it we're heading anyway?" He replied, "I just gotta take care of some unfinished business." I really didn't know what to make of that answer, but I wasn't looking to continue that conversation or dig any deeper than I had already dug. We pulled up to some corner in a rather poverty-stricken area, not an area I typically did any drop-offs or pickups. The guy said, "Ike, can you wait here for me?" I froze for a second, confused. I asked, "Do you need a ride back somewhere?" He replied, "Yeah, this'll be quick. I just gotta take care of some unfinished business first." I didn't want to drive this guy anywhere else, and I had a feeling whatever he was about to do in this house wasn't good, based on his unfinished business comment. I didn't want to be the getaway driver after some kind of fight or altercation, so I said, "Yeah, I'll be waiting here," but I had no intentions of waiting. The ride was marked as complete on my end anyway. He shut the car door and approached the house, but he wasn't approaching the front door. He went to the back of the house by the backyard. I didn't stick around after that. I drove off after about 20 seconds, slowly and quietly so he wouldn't hear me taking off. I chose to end my shift that night right then and there. I was pretty sketched out. The next day, I heard something on the news that changed a part of me forever. There were 2 people shot in their home in the town I dropped that guy off the night before. As the news report went on, they showed a picture of the suspected shooter, and it was the guy I dropped off at that house. He was apprehended fleeing the scene not too far away after neighbors reported hearing gunshots. The shooting was suspected to be gang-related. I have forever blamed myself for this partially, having been the one to drive someone with intentions of murdering people to his destination to commit his heinous act. People have told me if it wasn't me, it would have been another Uber driver, but I still can't help but feel partially to blame for this and not picking up on the red flags in that car ride. It was a stormy night, the first thunderstorm of the year. This was after my night shift ended at 4 a.m., and I had to call a lift to the train station since I didn't have my car at the time. I waited outside the place I bartended at the time, under the front patio to avoid getting soaked. A car pulled down the empty street and stopped in front of the bar. I had to check the Lyft app to ensure it was the correct car, and it was. A gray Honda Civic. I got in and greeted the driver, whose name was Sahil. I attempted to get in the front seat at first, but he told me not to and to sit in the back. That was only the second time I ever tried sitting in the front. That was before I realized it was customary to sit in the back seat. From the bar to the train station, it was about 10 minutes. The reason I was taking the train instead of just Ubering the whole way to my house is because I'd be saving about 40 bucks. The driver was going very slow, but there was nothing weird about that given the weather outside. I would expect anyone to drive cautiously in a torrential downpour like this one. The driver didn't take the highway route. He took us down the side roads. I wasn't concerned about missing my train though. I had plenty of time. I wasn't concerned until the driver said something under his breath and then pulled the car to the side of the road. I looked up from my phone to see why and saw a man in the pouring rain waving his hands in the air. I almost asked if he was stopping to pick him up, but I just observed. And yes, the man on the street got in the back passenger seat next to me. He was soaking wet. He kept his black hood on in the car. I scooted all the way over to the left. I was expecting the man and the driver to exchange some kind of words, but they didn't. Did they know each other? I had no idea what was going on. During the ride, I felt in the corner of my eyes the feeling of that man next to me looking at me. Maybe he was looking out my window, so I shot a quick half-second glance to him. But I was wrong. He was looking at me. On top of it, as the drive progressed, I started paying more attention to the route we were taking. It wasn't the right way to the train station. I tried to sneak a peek at the driver's phone screen to see if maybe he was following some incorrect route, but he seemed to have his phone on his lap, unlike most Lyft drivers who have their phones mounted on the dashboard. I politely said, "I think we're going the wrong way." He replied something in such a low tone mixed with a thick accent that I had a hard time understanding it. By the third time I asked him to repeat himself, I finally just repeated myself and said we're going the wrong way. I confirmed this by checking the map on my phone. The driver didn't acknowledge me, and I felt as though the guy next to me was inching closer every minute. He also wouldn't stop staring at me. Eventually, I asked the driver to pull over and canceled the ride. No acknowledgement. The driver was blowing stop signs, and there were no stoplights anywhere on these side roads, so I didn't really have a good time to escape, but I knew I was about to be their victim of something. This was some kind of trap, so I decided I was going to jump out of the car when I had the chance. I waited till we were on a street with woods on one side, which was perfect for me to make my escape. The car was going probably 15 to 20 miles per hour. I opened the car and jumped out. The two men screamed stuff in a different language, I'm guessing to each other. My impact with the ground was obviously painful, but I think the layer of water on the street might have cushioned my fall a little bit. The car completely stopped, and I saw the man who was next to me get out. I had to get on my feet and run into the woods. I heard him chasing after me for a little bit, but there was no shot he'd find me. I heard him yell something back to the car. It sounded like it was in Russian. Then he ran back to the car and they drove off. I immediately called an Uber instead of a Lyft this time, and this time I was brought safely to the train station. While on the train, I went ahead and filed an online police report, and then contacted Lyft and reported the driver. The next day, I also went to the police station and reported the whole incident. But here's where the bomb was dropped. There was a gray Honda Civic reported stolen just the night before. I gave them every last detail I could remember, and eventually I was on my way. I left that police station contemplating my life, and just how narrowly I may have escaped with my life.
I was 23 years old when this happened. I'm 27 now, and there hasn't been a week that has gone by that I haven't thought about this trip. To celebrate our friend Andrew's 21st birthday, we were taking him on a trip to Vegas. He was always a laid-back and kind of shy dude, and we all knew that he hadn't yet done the deed, so we planned on getting him really drunk and to put it bluntly, get him laid. We checked into the Carriage House Hotel, which was one of the more affordable hotels that we could find. We had 2 separate rooms as there were 7 of us in total. There were 4 of us in the room that I was in. Andrew was in the room with us. The first thing we did was eat, of course, as we were all starving. We then hit the casinos just to say that we did it. Out of the 7 of us, only one of us left with more money than entering. We checked out a bunch of different bars, and as the night went on, things got more blurry and everything got funnier. We got into a nightclub that was going wild. We caught 2 of our friends, John and Eddie, walking out with girls. They shot us the about to get lucky look, and we understood. The rest of us were trying to pressure Andrew into approaching a girl. But even in his drunk and somewhat loosened up state, he was still too shy to approach anybody or even dance. We got to the point where we were desperate to find somebody for Andrew. We could already foresee that he wouldn't meet any girls at this rate the whole trip. We left the club in search for a working girl. You may think our actions were weird, but as most people were by that time, we were completely hammered. We approached a girl walking alone. Acting like a couple of retards, asked the girl if she would be interested in hanging out with our friend Andrew, who was very noticeably not quite as messed up as us, but still intoxicated nonetheless. The girl wasn't anything special, I could say that even in the state I was in, but we wanted Andrew to have a good time. I don't quite remember what she said in direct response to me, but I remember her voice being slightly deep to the point that I looked at my friend. I also have this slight memory of her analyzing Andrew from head to toe. Again, I don't remember what she said, but it led to her grabbing Andrew's arm and the 2 of them walking off down the sidewalk. We laughed as we could see how awkward Andrew already felt. None of us thought it was weird what just happened though. But just out of curiosity, to see what was going to go down, we decided to trail behind them. They didn't seem to exchange any words. In fact, it appeared as if the girl was pulling him. We followed for about 15 minutes, I would guess. It could have been much longer, but I wouldn't really know. It was a darker and quieter street. The 2 of them stepped into what we assumed was an apartment building, and we all laughed. But we were so proud and happy for him too. There was no point in us waiting there, so we went back to the club. At around 2 in the morning, we headed back to the hotel. Andrew wasn't in either of the rooms. I was starting to sober up a little, and a bit of concern began to arise in me. John and Eddie, who weren't with us earlier, were shocked to hear about what happened. We all kind of assumed Andrew was just spending the night with the girl. Still, it was out of character for Andrew doing anything like this, so it was just weird. I texted him and tried calling him. He never answered, but my friends told me to relax. I crashed minutes later. I woke to a ringing sound. At first, with my mind still in sleep mode, I assumed it to be an alarm clock and tried tapping at my phone to turn it off. As my head began to return to reality, I realized the phone was ringing. It was Andrew's number. I literally felt my heart drop for whatever reason. I told my friends who were already awake from the ringing. I answered, and was greeted to heavy breathing on the other end. It was Andrew, and he sounded as if he were having some kind of panic attack. I put him on speakerphone so everyone could hear. Andrew began whispering into the phone. Most of it was incomprehensible, but we made out some of what he said. We heard him whisper, "It was that woman. Guys, you gotta get over here right now." We tried to engage him, but he wasn't answering anything we were saying. The other end went silent. We were all basically screaming into the phone, asking if he was alright, where he was, what was going on. I was already shaking in my skin at that point, but what happened next only made it 10 times worse. Something broke the silence on the other end. The sound of a door being opened with force, followed by the shrill and horrific screaming of Andrew, before the sound of the call ending. We were all freaking the fuck out. I called the police and tried to remember the address, or at least the street. We were so messed up last night that I couldn't even remember the route that we took. One of my friends claimed he did though. The police came over to the hotel and they escorted us. My friend seemed to remember exactly where the building was. He guided the police past the club, down the side roads, and eventually to the building. 2 officers from the front car went inside. We were to wait by the other car. A few minutes felt like hours, waiting in anticipation and in fear of the worst. One of the officers stepped out. She came over to us and asked us to come inside to confirm if the dead body belonged to Andrew. I felt like the entire world just collapsed on my head as John and Jerry both started crying. They didn't want to go in, so I followed the officer into the building, which turned out wasn't an apartment at all, rather some kind of dark, abandoned storage building. There was the dead body, leaning out from the open closet, the emotionless face, mouth lifelessly hung open, staring up at the ceiling. It was horrible, but it wasn't Andrew. I knew it right away. The most noticeable feature, this boy had blonde hair, while Andrew had black hair. The officers had already scoped the whole place out, so they didn't know what to do. I took a look in the closet that I had a feeling Andrew was hiding in. Nothing. Not even his cell phone. We all did our best to forget about it, but a little more than a month later, I got a phone call during the middle of the night once again. I picked up. There was a bad reception and nobody was saying anything. I was about to hang up when a faint yet familiar voice said, "Jesse?" "Andrew?" I yelled. The sound of a door slamming in the background on the other end was the last thing I heard before the call ended. He didn't pick up after the 5 times I tried ringing him. So what did I do? I called the police and had them trace the call. The call was not coming from Nevada at all. No, it was coming from New Jersey. In fact, our own town, and a house not too far away. They said they were sending somebody to the house, but that wasn't enough for me. I had to go there myself. I GPSed that address, hopped in my car, and floored it the whole 5 minutes it took to reach the address. It was a vacant house on a corner. I sneaked up to the front door and put my ear against it to listen for anything inside. Nothing. I crawled around back where I found an open window. I listened for a moment. There were the sounds of small snaps and cracks from upstairs. The kinds of sounds you hear from somebody standing or moving on wood. I was sure that he was in there. I hopped inside, but I didn't even get to begin my search before noticing something at the edge of the hallway. Somebody was standing there, facing me, but I couldn't see their face. All I could see were their pale, exposed legs and long black hair down past their shoulders. It was a woman. I was feeling sick to my stomach, anticipating her charging up to me like in some kind of horror movie, but instead, she turned and ran in the opposite direction. I heard the sound of a door slamming shut, followed by footsteps stomping downstairs, and then yelling of a man and woman. There was an even heavier pair of footsteps now stomping up the stairs. That was my cue to run. I left the house and dove into the bush. Not even 5 seconds later, someone stepped out onto the porch, and for the first time in months, it seemed as if luck was finally on my side as a police car pulled up to the curb, flashing its siren. I heard the guy in the stoop mutter, "Shit," before slamming the door behind himself. The police followed inside. Apparently the idiot didn't even lock the door. I stayed hidden, as I didn't want to startle the cops and end up with a bullet in my skull. I waited by the car out front, and minutes later, one of the officers came outside with the guy in cuffs. I introduced myself and warned that there was also a woman in there, but they never found the woman. In fact, one of the bedroom windows were completely open, which implied that she escaped. Andrew was found upstairs, locked in a closet. He was in horrible shape, malnourished, hair long and dirty. You could smell him from a mile away. The police ran the records for the man. He was never married, so they really had no way of finding out who the woman was. He even claimed that he had only known her for a day. Nothing made sense, and it still doesn't. Andrew admitted that he was raped, beaten, and hardly fed. I can't even imagine admitting something like that to someone. The girl that originally escorted him to that building was only there to collect payment from what he described as the operators. For some reason, they forced Andrew to give them his hometown and addresses of everyone that was with him that night, which explained why they were in our town, but Not actually why they were in our town, like what their intentions were. To kill us? To add us to whatever kind of sex slave operation they were running? I'm the only person he's told out of our group of friends, and whenever somebody asked about it, I just said I don't know what happened. Things were finally starting to look up, when a few days later, I got a text message from a random number one late night, saying, "Fuck you." Whoever it was blocked me, as I couldn't respond, so I just blocked them back. It happened again the next week, and then the next month. Sure, I had the idea that it had something to do with the incident, but I had no idea it would be taken as far as it was. I woke up one night with a hint of brightness in my room. There was light from outside, in the backyard, shining ever so slightly through the closed blinds. It wasn't sunlight, it was the backyard porch light. I could see a shadow moving in front of the blinds. Somebody was definitely out there. I couldn't really see out of the crack at the bottom of the blind, so I inched it up ever so slightly. There was somebody standing by the window looking right at me, as if they were waiting for me. But they were gone before I could even think about grabbing my phone to get a picture of them. I strongly believe it was that woman I saw in the house. That was the last time I saw or heard from anyone involved in this shit. Nothing of this whole situation has made a single ounce of sense, even with the best explanation Andrew could give me. I don't see a point in getting into how Andrew and everyone else is doing, as it's nothing interesting. The only thing I can say is I'm waiting for the next time I see any of these animals, and I'll be ready to call the police or take them on myself.
There's this abandoned mansion in Toronto that came up in a group chat among my friends. We saw pictures of it through a mutual friend who had recently gone to explore there. It looked immaculate based on the pictures, and we were intrigued to go check it out. It was 10 miles north from us, so the drive wasn't bad. The mansion sat on a big open grass plain, with pine trees and other foliage surrounding the perimeter of the property, acting as a natural fence or just a wall of privacy from the outside. My friends, who I'll call Chad and Brad for this story, followed close behind me as I led the way up the large gravel driveway towards the front of the unfinished house. By the looks of it, construction on the structure had been abandoned when it was near completion, as the outside foundation seemed to be finished. Our mutual friend who found out about the place had told us that he hopped through a back window that was left unlocked, so that's what we looked for. The unlocked window turned out to be in the kitchen, right over the counter, so one at a time we squeezed through the window, crawling onto the counter and then down to the ground. First impressions in the kitchen, almost immaculate, minus a few of the cabinet doors sprawled out on the floor as if they had yet to be installed, and just things like sheetrock boards laying around. But everything seemed new, and it was a shame the construction was abandoned. The three of us kind of went our own directions in the house. I went towards the living room, which again was almost pristine. It was a huge room that transitioned into the dining room, and then from there, a wide hallway with at least 10 different doors. My friends were already checking out some of the rooms in this hallway. I peeped into each room and realized most of them were bedrooms. At the end of the hall was a 3-door garage. The last door in the hall before the garage was the basement. I called to Brad and Chad that I was checking out the basement. I got an acknowledgement from at least one of them. The basement had this bizarre spiral staircase, so when I got to the bottom, I couldn't even see the door at the top. There were no windows down there, so besides my flashlight, it was pitch black. It was a completely unfinished basement, pieces of drywall everywhere, unfinished wood foundation where walls should be, but the basement was huge. Like there were multiple sections down there. It was big enough to fit a basketball court and more. Then I came across this back room with a few storage containers. I was here to explore after all, so I curiously started lifting the lids off the containers. The first two seemed to contain building tools and supplies like wood planks. But then I heard something from one of the other containers. It was like something caused the container to make a bump sound. Could it be an animal? Or was I just hearing things? I went to the container and noticed the lid was not sealed on this one, as it wasn't sitting perfectly snug on the top. As I bent over to try and lift the lid, it lifted without me touching it, and I heard a whispering noise. I fell backwards on my hands as this happened, and while I was on the ground, I saw a smiling woman looking at me. The only thing lifting the container up was her head. She looked at me, laughed, and said peekaboo, and she laughed some more. I ran to the top of the stairs, but the basement door was now locked. I banged on it for my friends to open it up, but they were apparently messing with me. I heard creaks on the spiral staircase below me. I couldn't see her yet, but I could hear her laughing getting closer, and she was mumbling incomprehensible things. I screamed at the top of my lungs to please help me, and Chad finally opened the door. I ran out and looked back for half a second, greeted by this ghostly, skinny figure of this pale woman looking up at me, almost at the top step. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Chad saw the woman too, and we bolted for the front door. We didn't care about leaving it open. The three of us got to the edge of the property to talk. After an hour of just sitting in my car thinking and talking, I agreed to go back inside and unlock the basement door. As scary as what I witnessed was, I didn't want to be responsible for someone dying down there. But when we got back inside, the basement door was wide open. I promise you we locked that door, so it made no sense. We once again bolted back outside towards the car and drove home, to never return to that mansion again. When I was a very young kid, we lived in an upper middle class neighborhood. Lots of space between each house. All the houses on our street were very nice, but there was one abnormally large house. It was closer to a mansion. It sat right across the street from us, and my bedroom window could look across to the windows of the mansion. Since our street was incredibly low traffic, our parents let us play soccer in the street. So my two friends Brian and Zeke were playing soccer one sunny day. It was usually just the three of us, so we had this kind of free-for-all version of soccer that we made up. Eventually the ball was kicked onto the property of the mansion, so I ran over to get it. When I picked up the ball, I looked at all the windows to see if the house owner was possibly witnessing me on his property. But at one of the top windows was a young boy who looked to be about our age. I hurried off the property and back to my friends. I asked them if they had ever seen the kid who lives in that mansion, and they hadn't. The second time I looked back at the window, the boy was no longer there. It wasn't for a while after that, probably a month, that I was in my room playing Nintendo, and for whatever reason I got up to get something, and I looked out my window across to the mansion, and I saw that boy at the window again. He was surely looking at me, all the way from across the street. It kind of creeped me out. I walked away from the window to ignore it. Why hadn't I ever seen that kid outside before? Come to think of it, why hadn't I ever really seen the owners of that house? I asked my parents about the boy across the street. They said they were pretty sure there was no boy in that house. So the next time Brian, Zeke, and I were playing in the street, we were thinking of potential fourth players to have a real game. I had an idea. I ran to the front door of that mansion and rang the bell. A 50-something-year-old woman answered. I asked if her son wanted to play soccer with us. She looked at me puzzled and said, "What son?" I replied, "The boy who was always at the upstairs window." I can't describe the look on her face besides shock and fear. She asked me what the boy looked like, and after my best description, a tear rolled down her cheek and she put her hands over her mouth. She brought me upstairs to the room where I kept seeing the boy. It was a boy's bedroom. She showed me a picture of a kid and asked me if this was the boy I was seeing, and I said yes. She told me that was her 8-year-old son Charlie, who died 10 years ago. That woman living there had been alone ever since she lost her son and husband. She believed what I said because I nor my parents would have ever had any way of knowing about her son. She didn't tell me or my parents what happened to her husband or son. As sad as this all was, it was still horrifying. There was one other time I saw the boy. I was in my room, months later, and I looked out my window to the woman's mansion across the street. There he was again, at the upstairs window. I could tell he was looking at me. I shut my blind with force and tried to forget about it. It still sends shivers up my spine when I think back on it. I was once hired to house sit for a friend of a family friend who was going away for a week. In this case, I should call it mansion sit because the family was absolutely loaded and the mansion sat on the rich side of town in front of a huge lake. I was 21 and it just seemed like a cool job to have for a week. The family's one rule was to throw no parties and no more than 2 guests at any time, which even that I thought was generous of them. The father's name was Benjamin, and that's the only name you'll need to know. Ben left me a list of things to keep track of every night, which included feeding the 2 cats and 2 parrots, watering the plants, among other things that really won't contribute to the story. The house was a half hour from home, so instead of just driving there and back every day, I opted to just sleep in one of the guest bedrooms, which they offered to me after all. The first day there, I got there very late, so it was a short one that got me kind of warmed up for what to expect the week ahead of me. After doing the insignificant amount of morning chores, I hopped in the pool they had in the backyard. The pool literally overlooked a gorgeous, tranquil lake, and even with the thought of getting to enjoy this unbelievable house for a week, I was still incredibly jealous. As I was in the pool, I noticed through the giant floor-to-ceiling windows to the living room somebody walking inside. I jumped out from the pool freaking out. I ran to grab the towel and dry myself for a second before storming inside yelling, "Excuse me." I didn't see anyone in the living room, so I entered the kitchen, and there was a fairly large Hispanic woman who looked to be about 35 to 40. She was just standing there as if waiting for me. I asked her who she was and why she was here while trying to keep myself composed and confident. She said in a thick accent that she was the maid who came every day to clean the floors and stuff. She introduced herself as Eliza. I instantly felt a sense of relief and introduced myself as Mike, the guy who was house-sitting for the week. She spoke in as little words as possible. I don't think her English was too good, but she basically said she was going to clean the floors in the kitchen and living room now. I said that was completely fine and let her do her thing. I asked her how she got in the house, and she said she had her own copy of the key. So that was that. I went back out to the pool for a little longer to let her do her thing. When I got out from the pool, I dried up and took a shower. After my shower, I fed the animals again. The parrots were easier than the cats, surprisingly. I didn't see the maid again, but I didn't really want to get in her way and have awkward small talk with someone who could barely speak English anyway. I had a couple friends over that night because everyone was eager to see the place, but I respected their rules of only 2 guests at a time. I gave them the best tour I could. Then we kinda just chilled in the game room they had, played some air hockey and pool table, and drank a little bit. When I told my friends about the cleaning lady scaring the hell out of me, they both found it insanely suspicious. Like, why wouldn't Ben have told me about the cleaning lady? They brought up a good point, so I shot Ben a text, asking about the cleaning lady. He didn't answer right away, and I didn't want to call. My friends wanted to sleep over, but I didn't want to push it. I had no idea if they had cameras in the house or not. So they left, and quickly after I started getting myself ready to lay down in bed. At some point I got a text back from Ben, apologizing for taking so long, and then asking what cleaning lady, with 2 question marks and an exclamation point. I typed back, Eliza, the Hispanic woman who came by and claimed she was the cleaning lady. That's when Ben called me with a concerned voice. He got more details from me after telling me there was no cleaning lady. That was the whole reason they hired me. I felt like I had been taken for a fool, but more importantly, I was terrified that I may not have been in that house alone at that very moment. Ben told me to just hide in a bedroom and that he'd call the police for me. So we hung up, and I waited in the room for the police to arrive. I had Ben on FaceTime when the police arrived, so he could also talk to them. We all looked through the house together, from top to bottom, and we didn't see anyone. I told Ben the lady said she had a spare key, but he said he was confident that that was a lie, because they never made any spare keys. He was confident she simply snuck in when I was in the pool or outside in general. After we were sure there was no one in the house, the police left, but they made sure I locked all the doors and windows before they did so. I spoke with Ben a little longer, who was very comforting, and asked I just hold down the fort and call the police if anything else should happen. We hung up, and I went to bed. I locked the door, of course. I left the air conditioner off so I could hear any potential noises from outside of the room. As I lay awake, subconsciously waiting for a noise, I heard one from under the bed. It sounded like a squeak on the wood floor. I hopped out of the bed and looked under it. There were 2 people hiding underneath. One was the lady from earlier, Eliza. The other was some man probably 10 years older than her, with his hand over her mouth. They both locked eyes with me. I screamed and I ran for the door. The moment that it took me to unlock the door and then open and shut it was more than I was comfortable with. As I did, I heard them crawling out from the bed. I ran outside to my car without my shoes and drove down the street, where I called the police, and then I called Ben again. I waited for police cars to pass, and then I followed them. We once again searched the whole house and found no one. This time I didn't stick around for the night. Ben told me to go home and stay safe. The family booked a flight back home the next day, cutting their vacation short. The intruders were never identified. All that can be speculated is they walked in through the front door while I was in the pool because I didn't lock the door, and that they somehow knew the family would be gone. No further info is known. When my friend Dom turned 21, he organized a group trip to Vegas among our closest friends. We stayed at the Gold Coast Hotel and Casino, which was a 5-minute walk from the Strip. There were 6 of us, too many names to list, so I'll just name them as I go. But we had 3 rooms, and 2 to each room. I was rooming with Joey. Our flight landed around 5, so by the time we were unpacked and settled in the hotel, it was around 7. We stopped at In-N-Out for dinner since we're all from the East Coast, and the novelty of In-N-Out was pretty appealing. Right after that, we walked around until ending up at the Bellagio Hotel's casino. It was absolutely massive. We all kind of split off into little groups. Joey and I were just doing slot machines, while 3 of the others were at blackjack tables. I'm not sure where the 6th went. But when I say Joey and I were doing the slot machines, I mean we were really just sitting there occasionally spinning the slot machine every few minutes. Really just collecting those free shots that the cocktail waitresses would walk around with to try and get the patrons drunker and looser with their money. Let's just say we were trying not to blow $1,000 on the first night. After a few shots, we went over to our friends by the blackjack tables to watch them. I'd say after an hour at the casino watching our friends gamble their money away, we all left with intentions of walking to this place called Lily Bar and Lounge. But halfway to the bar, I did a quick pat down of all my pockets, making sure I had my phone and wallet. Then I had that mini heart attack when I felt an empty pocket where my wallet should have been. I started to freak out, asking my friends if they remember when I had it last. None of them remembered. I asked them to wait for me, while I ran back to the Bellagio to check. They didn't want to wait though. Joey just gave me his room card and told me to check our hotel if it wasn't at the Bellagio. Then the 5 of them continued walking to the bar while I ran back to the casino of the Bellagio. I felt very defeated, as I was predicting having lost my wallet on the first night, and I would be absolutely screwed if I wanted to get into any bars or clubs. I retraced all my steps in the casino, including checking the seat of the slot machine we were at. Then I checked Lost and Found, but there was nothing. So next I had to try our hotel room. This was my last shot at finding it, and I felt sick to my stomach about it now. I felt this could ruin my entire trip. I ran through the lobby and up the stairs to the 2nd floor where my room was. I got to the door and tried Joey's key card. The card reader flashed red a few times. I wondered if he had a faulty card. I rubbed the card with my shirt to remove any smudges or whatever that could be hindering the card reader. On the next try, it beeped and lit green, and I opened the door. I started searching the entire room, throwing clothes out of my suitcase and onto the bed, digging through my suitcase, then tearing through the bed sheets even though they weren't even slept in yet. I checked under the beds, pillows, on the table and TV stand, but it was not in there. I collapsed on the bed, literally wanting to cry. Then I thought to maybe call the front desk and ask if it was turned into Lost and Found, so I did just that. The desk worker picked up on the 3rd or 4th ring, and I asked if they could check the Lost and Found for my wallet. She said hold on, then put me on hold for a minute. When she came back, she asked what my name was because apparently lots of people lose their wallets in Vegas. I told her my name, then she said something that confused me. She said something along the lines of, "Sir, didn't I speak to you just now at the front desk when you asked me what room number you were in?" I asked when she was referring to, and she said within the past 15 minutes. That wasn't possible because I had been gone for nearly 2 hours. I told the lady I was coming down to the front desk, then I hung up. But it made me wonder, just what if? I checked the one closet in the room, and it was empty. Then I looked at the bathroom. The bathroom door was shut. I grabbed the doorknob, sighed, and yanked it open, expecting to see someone. But no, it appeared empty. I turned on the bathroom light just to look at myself in the mirror, but I almost instantly noticed the shadow through the shower curtain. It was undoubtedly a person in there casting that shadow who looked taller than me. I didn't want to get stabbed or shot that night. I left the hotel room and immediately called the number for the hotel. I asked them to send security up right away. Not even 5 minutes later, 2 large men in security shirts came down the hall and I pointed at the door, yelling there's someone in our bathroom shower who stole my wallet. I opened the door for them, and right center of the hotel room was this 30-something-year-old man with a COVID mask over his mouth. He had his hands in the air. Security guards escorted him out of our room and patted him down for weapons. And not so shockingly, they found my wallet in his pocket. He didn't have any weapons on him though. Security called the police and arrested the man, and I got my wallet back. The man admitted to finding my wallet outside of the hotel, went to the front desk asking what room number I was in, and letting himself in. Even though no one was harmed, I feel like this could have turned out so much worse. For example, if I decided to open that shower curtain. My friends hardly believed my story until security guards backed it up later that night. The rest of the trip went completely normal. A few years back, I stayed with 3 friends in Bally's Hotel in Vegas, once known as the MGM Grand, until November 21st in 1980, when it burned down. The fire began from a refrigerated pastry display case in one of the restaurants located on the first floor, and apparently the fire engulfed the resort's casino, and the smoke traveled into the hotel tower, killing 85 people due to smoke inhalation. We read about this in some of the reviews of the place while booking. But I mean, that was 40 years ago. How would it really affect our stay? The rates for rooms were surprisingly more affordable than some comparable hotels for that specific weekend. Something I didn't pay attention to in the reviews, though, were the number of people who reported witnessing and hearing strange paranormal events. There are even reports of ghostly activity in the casino. The most common complaint I was seeing from guests was the presence of a smell of smoke and burning, especially on the upper floors, even though there was no one smoking. But I wasn't aware of any of this on our first night there. On our second night there, we went to a couple casinos, then got dinner and went back to the room to regroup before heading back out. Not without stopping at a liquor store for some booze beforehand, so we could all loosen up a little more before going out. After we pre-gamed for a good half hour to an hour, we all called an Uber to Omnia nightclub not too far away. By the time we got there, the liquor was definitely kicking in, and this is where my memory starts getting a little fuzzy. I remember we were waiting online for at least half an hour, and I remember my one friend Alec talking to this group of girls in front of us. Next thing that I really remember was standing at the bar inside the club with my friends trying to order drinks, and I vaguely remember bits and pieces of being on the dance floor. But when I say I blacked out besides that, I'm not exaggerating. The night became a little clearer when I left the club, but according to my friends, I left alone. I somehow made my way back to the hotel and back to the room on the 17th floor. From here on out, I remember just about everything. I was sitting on the edge of the bed with my head in my hands for quite a while, feeling like my head was spinning, when I heard what sounded to be a kid coughing on the other side of the door. I pulled myself together and went to check through the peephole, making sure no one was choking or anything, I guess. There was no one visible, so I opened the door. The corridor was empty. At this point, standing up made me feel even sicker, so I went to the bathroom to throw up. After that, I felt better and laid down in the bed to go to sleep. It was 3-something in the morning. None of my friends were back yet. I heard the coughing once again. It sounded like a young boy's coughing. I didn't feel like getting up to check again, though. I resumed trying to fall into a deep sleep, when out of nowhere, this ear-piercing ringing went off, along with a flashing red light in the room. It was the smoke alarm, and in the corner of the room, every time that flashing light blinked, I could see a person standing in the corner of the room. It looked like a young boy facing the door. I looked closer to see if I was seeing things, and on the fourth blink, I started to scream and crawl backwards out of the bed and onto the floor. I don't know what exactly I thought was happening, that I was going to be killed or that I was seeing a ghost, but after a while, as if I were experiencing sleep paralysis or a hallucination, the apparition of the boy in the corner disappeared. I gave myself time to breathe and calm down, and convinced myself I was just seeing things. And just like the boy disappearing, the smoke alarm turned off a minute later. My heart was racing for the next 10 minutes as I sat up in the bed on my phone trying to contact my friends. They got back around 4, and I decided not to tell them for the sake of sounding like a drunk fool. I did more research the next day about the hotel and supernatural sightings, and I was even more disturbed when I read that other people had witnessed and heard a boy coughing on the 17th and 18th floors. Needless to say, I didn't want to stay there anymore. Thank God it was only a 3-night trip. In 2018, my friends and I rented an Airbnb in North Vegas to attend the Electric Daisy Festival, which is an EDM music festival. It was my first experience of this kind. I'm not even a fan of EDM, nor do I do any kind of hard drugs. But I went with my 3 friends who are into this stuff, who I'll call Jess, Marissa, and Nicole. My friend Jess had a drug dealer connection in Vegas who she was planning on buying Molly from. The festival starts pretty late in the day and goes all night. So on the first day, we were just driving around Vegas trying to find things to do. At some point, Jess needed to meet up with her friend to buy the Molly, so while we were eating, she went to pick up from him. Afterwards, we went back to the Airbnb to start getting ready for the festival, changing into our outfits. If you know anything about music festivals, girls usually wear the most revealing outfits imaginable. It was new to me. I needed my friends to help me buy an outfit. As we called a lift to the racetrack where the festival was being held, Jess handed us all our own little baggies with the Molly. I was very nervous, as I've never really done any drugs except for weed, if that even counts. The ride there was surprisingly quick. Jess told us the Molly should kick in around 45 minutes after taking it. By then, we were online to get inside. The effects of it didn't really kick in for a while, and my friends all agreed they were already feeling it. So I had a feeling I didn't take enough, and I went for the baggie I smuggled into the festival and took a little more. For the next hour, we danced as the sun went down and the sky got darker, and all the lights from the stages and carnival rides lit up the place. I was realizing the Molly was kicking in hard and I was starting to trip. It was such a surreal experience with all the lights, booming music, and the euphoric feeling of the drug. But eventually I realized I took way too much. I started to lose track of where I was, and next thing I knew, I was lost in the crowd without my friends. At some point this guy started talking to me, and I must have asked him for help finding my friends, because he told me, "I know where your friends are, I'll take you to them." I followed him through the crowd holding his hand, till we got closer to the back of the crowd. I asked where we were going. He said he knows where Jess is. I thought the fact that he knew my friend's name meant he was telling the truth. Then he asked me to call Jess and he'd talk to her, so I dialed Jess's number and handed him the phone. 5 seconds later, he started talking to her. He was on the phone with her for a minute before hanging up. He said Jess left to the hotel with my other friends because one of them got sick. He said he would take me there. I stood there tripping like an idiot and said okay. He called us an Uber, and when we got inside, he asked for my number. I gave it to him because I was yet to see any red flags in my inebriated state, till I looked at the Uber driver's screen and saw that it said the destination was 15 miles away. And then it hit me. Why did the guys say my friends went to the hotel when we weren't staying at a hotel? We were staying at an Airbnb. I asked the driver where we were going, and I don't remember what he said, but whatever he said made me realize he was not taking us to the Airbnb. I asked the driver to turn me around, but the guy next to me started claiming he was my boyfriend and I was just incredibly drunk and needed to get home. I started to scream that he's not my boyfriend, that I just met him, and eventually the driver believed me and stopped the car, kicking the guy out. I started to cry and asked the driver to bring me back to the festival so I could find my friends, but he informed me the festival doesn't allow re-entry, so he brought me back to the Airbnb. He waited until he saw that I let myself in using the code, and then I started frantically texting and calling all my friends till one of them picked up. They couldn't hear me on the phone at the festival, so I typed in our group chat what happened. Jess came back to the Airbnb to be with me, while Marissa and Nicole stayed till much later at the festival. I somehow slept like a baby that night, but I woke up the next morning to 3 missed calls and a handful of texts from that guy who tried to most likely kidnap me. The text went as follows. "Hey, did you make it back? Where are you? I'll come to you and help you to your Airbnb. Honestly, fuck you for making a scene like that in front of the Uber driver, making me look like some kind of rapist." It goes without saying this guy never knew who any of my friends were, and he never got on the phone with Jess. I most likely told him my friend's name when I asked him for help in finding them. This was my first time doing a hard drug, and it blurred my judgment so much that I almost allowed myself to possibly get kidnapped. When I was in college, I used to house sit for a family for a few years when they would go on their annual family vacations. I've had a handful of other scary, creepy experiences, but the one I want to talk about today was the one that forced me to quit house sitting for them. I was in my 20s and was trying to make ends meet. House sitting was one of the many side hustles I had. The family would be going on a 2-week vacation abroad and wouldn't have any service. So if anything went wrong, I would have to call the police or their relatives depending on the situation. Please keep in mind that I've already had a few creepy experiences with their house prior to this, but it was never scary enough to deter me because they paid me very well. I used to work at an animal shelter, so I was well versed in animal care, and I knew about cat behavior. This family had 4 cats who were all very well behaved. For the first few days, all was well. I slept in the guest bedroom and went to school from their house because they lived close enough to where I could just walk to class and didn't have to pay for parking or bring lunch since I could just go back to their place. Then the issues began after a few days. My boyfriend at the time came over with dinner to keep me company, as he knew I was always a bit creeped out by the house. We sat in the guest bedroom and watched TV for a few hours eating, until he said he needed to go home. Sometimes he'd sleep over, but he told me on this particular night that he had a strong gut feeling he needed to sleep at home. He urged me to go home because that gut feeling he had was really bad. At that point, it was around midnight, and to be honest, I didn't want to go home. To put it bluntly, I have a complicated home life and didn't get along with my parents. The only time I'd get a break from home was the annual house sitting once a year, and I didn't feel like wasting it. My only sibling, who's also my best friend, moved out due to the toxicity, and honestly, home wasn't home without them anymore. I told him that I'll be fine and I'll lock up after he left. He was still really uneasy and tried to persuade me to go home once again. He tried to explain that while he had slept over before, for some reason tonight the house just felt unsettling. I thought it was because the house was over a century old, but it was just renovated, so I felt better about it. I reminded him that there was a home security alarm that I always said, the neighborhood was safe, and I had 4 friendly cats with me. He reluctantly left and drove home, and that was when it started happening. I shut all the doors and windows, locked everything, and set the security alarm. Once I got comfortable in bed, the TV started to turn on by itself. We were just using the TV, so I thought I accidentally sat on the remote, but I saw the remote on the nightstand. I quickly turned it off. Just as it went off, it turned back on. I thought it was strange since the TV was working perfectly the entire night, but it was even stranger that when the TV turned on by itself, it went to this off channel like it was just black and white, like it had no signal. So I kept turning it off, and it kept turning on. I began to freak out and unplugged the TV entirely. Even though I'd had creepy experiences before in this house, this one had never happened before. I told myself that the house was just renovated, maybe there were some wiring issues. I still didn't go home and went and slept on the couch instead. The next day, my boyfriend came over again. I told him about what happened the night before, and he told me that I should have just went home. I was pretty freaked out, but honestly, it was still not as bad as having to deal with my family. That night, we had dinner together again and watched a movie in the living room. For this next part, I do have to explain the house structure. The house is 2 floors. There's a first floor where you come in through the front door straight into the living room, and the second floor is actually the basement, which is essentially a big living room with another room that can be used as a spare bedroom. The stairs leading downstairs are incredibly creaky and creepy. I don't understand why they didn't fix it during the renovation. As for the cats, they love to be everywhere and anywhere. They all had the personality where they wanted to be around you, but not necessarily held or cuddled. They were all pretty calm cats that liked quieter environments. Of the 4 cats, there was one cat that was the youngest at around 3 years old, and he was just a bit smaller than the other 3. That night, as we watched the movies, my blood ran cold as I heard sounds from the basement that sounded like an infant crying. My boyfriend froze as he slowly turned to look at me, as if signaling to me silently if I heard it too. I remembered from my time working in the animal shelter during my training that sometimes cats sound like babies, especially if they're in duress. As I mentioned earlier, the cats like to be around people and will follow you around the house, but not close enough to cuddle. I counted and only counted 3. The little younger cat was missing. I figured it must be the younger cat and went downstairs to the basement where I found it stuck in the spare room. He was smaller but more energetic than the other cats. He somehow closed the door behind him and was stuck in the room all alone. I carried him up the stairs and we resumed the movie. Mid-movie, we did pause it as it was time to feed the cats. The owners had a strict food schedule for their cats. The cats' food station was in the kitchen, and the kitchen was the only area that connected to the basement. To best explain the layout of the house, the main entrance connects to the living room. The living room then diverges into 2 different sections. One connects to the kitchen and the other connects to 3 bedrooms. One being the spare bedroom, a master bedroom, and another bedroom that belongs to the family's child, with the living room being connected to the kitchen as well. The kitchen was the connecting area where you must enter it to go to the basement or living room. For these cats, the only time that they didn't want to be around humans was while they were eating and after they ate, as they like to take naps or rest with their full bellies. They like to nap in the master bedroom or the teenager's room, as it smells like their family. They always did this every year that I babysat them, so it wasn't new. It also wasn't unusual to not see them for a little bit after mealtime. We finished our movie and went into the kitchen, void of any cats. As we were enjoying dinner, we both once again heard crying noises from the basement. It was naturally louder because we were in the kitchen, which was closer to the basement. I didn't see any cats in the kitchen, and I didn't think to check the living room because I was panicking internally. My boyfriend was visibly creeped out, and I told him I'd check it out since it was likely the cat again. I couldn't help but notice that the cries sounded a little different from earlier. It was more frequent and higher pitched. I turned on the lights to the basement and slowly crept down the stairs, saying the cat's name. With each step, the crying got louder, but when I finally made it down, the crying abruptly stopped. I checked the spare room, any crevices, and under the couch. He was nowhere. At that point, I was feeling so scared and could hear my heartbeat in my head. I don't even go on regular walks, I definitely don't jog, and I absolutely don't run, but I ran up those stairs like my life depended on it. When I got back into the kitchen, I felt my whole body go cold as my heart sank. My boyfriend was standing in the kitchen with a horrid look on his face, as all 4 cats surrounded him. He told me that as I went down the stairs to the crying noises, the 4 cats came out at the same time from the area where the bedrooms were. No cat had been downstairs the entire time. I immediately and silently packed up my items, jammed it into my backpack, and we both left the house. For the remaining week, I would only return to the house once a day to clean the litter box and feed them. I know I was going against their eating schedule, but at that point, I really didn't care. After the last day, I locked up, dropped the keys into their hiding spot, thanked them for the opportunity, but that it was my last time, and I never returned. I hated that house, and looking back, the experiences I had each year seemed like it was escalating. I should have stopped much sooner. I still remember calling my sibling during the drive to my parents' house after the incident. I felt even worse when they revealed that they also had their own experience in that house, and kept it away from me because they knew I was trying to save money to move out, and they didn't want to scare me. First, I'll start off with descriptions of all of those involved. My name is Kelsey. I was 17 years old at the time of this event. I'm 5'3". My friend Haley's 5'8". My friend Sammy is 5'7". It was March 19th, 2016. I was dog sitting at my mom's friend's house for some extra cash to help me out before going off to college next year. It was a cool spring night, and the people I was dog sitting for have a super cool sunroom where my friends and I like to smoke, so I decided to invite 2 of my other friends over to spend the night and make this whole dog sitting thing more fun. Haley and Sammy were a little older, with Haley being 23 and Sammy being 22. They brought over some vodka for us to drink. We hung out for a couple hours, drinking, smoking, laughing, and catching up. Then we start to get a bunch of phone calls. Now normally this would not be weird, except for the fact that the phone was supposed to be disconnected. We ignore the first couple phone calls, thinking they'll leave a message or a call back in the morning, as it was nearly midnight. The calls were persistent, and we could tell this person was not going to leave us alone until we answered. Sammy decided to answer the phone, and there was a man on the line, claiming to have the owner's wallet at a gas station 25 minutes from the house, which did not make sense. This man insisted that we come pick up the wallet now, which we all found extremely odd. After minutes of this man insisting that it was urgent that we come pick up the wallet, Sammy finally got the man to understand that we were not leaving the house and that we'll get it in the morning. We hung up the phone and all got a weird feeling in our stomachs. We grabbed the dog Willis and run into the back bedroom, shut all the blinds, and lock the door. We already have impaired judgment because of the weed and booze. We talk things out, and we decide we were just being paranoid, and the man was just trying to make sure we get the wallet back to the owner safely. Hours go by of us drinking and smoking some more. Then we decide to watch a funny movie and make some food to calm down and get ready for bed that night. We move from the sunroom to the living room and pop in a DVD. The sunroom is located in between the kitchen and living room of the house and the backyard by the pool. The door in between the pool and the sunroom does not have a lock on it, but the door that's in between the kitchen living room and the sunroom does not have a dog door for Willis to go out back to go to the bathroom. So we all agree that although we were a little spooked by the phone call, we were in a safe neighborhood and Willis would bark if anything were to come to the door. Time creeps by. We were laughing on the couches, Haley and I sitting next to each other on one and Sammy across the room on the other. The clock struck 3 a.m. and that's when things started to get creepy. Remember earlier how we left the lockable door open to the sunroom so that Willis could get outside to pee? That's where he entered from. I'm fully immersed in the comedy, but do you ever get that unexplainable feeling that you're being watched by somebody? That feeling suddenly became overpowering. I turn towards the kitchen and see a dark mass hunched over in the kitchen. I freeze and for a second think I'm seeing things. I watch as this mass reaches up into the cabinet, and that's when I realize there's someone in the house. I nudge Haley's side with my elbow and say real quietly, "Haley, I think there's somebody in the house." She looks into the kitchen and screams bloody murder. This dark mass then whips his head around and looks directly at me. We make eye contact, and I felt my entire body tense up. All I could see were his piercing blue eyes contrasting against the orange lamp just below the cabinet on the table. Everything else was covered by his black hoodie, pants, shoes, and gloves. He even wore a ski mask that covered up to his nose and mouth. Sammy then gets up to look at what Haley and I are staring at, and somehow musters up the courage to yell, "Get the fuck out." He calmly closes the cabinet and slowly walks out the sunroom doors. We immediately get up and rush to the corner of the room farthest from where he was crouching and call 911. They arrive 3 minutes later and search the entire apartment, take our statements, and sit outside the house for the rest of the night to see if the intruder would come back. The 3 of us did not stick around long enough to see if he would. We leave our booze, weed, and my car all at the house with the cops and the dog and head home. We come back the next day to find clothes all throughout the house messed with, and crumbs by the doggy door, understandably so Willis wouldn't bark at whoever came in. To this day, we still have no idea who called us and or who came into that house. I have not been back since. I'm 28 years old. I've been an animal lover ever since I was a child, which led to me pursuing a career path that had to do with animals. I'm a veterinary assistant, but for a while I also had a little side gig in which I'd offer to house sit animals for people going away on vacation and such. This ranged from cats to dogs to birds. I had actually house sat entire weekends a few times for people who presumably didn't have any family available to watch them. Being a young female who also already works at a veterinary hospital, most people weren't intimidated by the idea of me staying in their house while they're gone. I wasn't just some random person off the street. My credentials were all over the internet. I got a response to my ad one day from a man named Jeremy seeking my services. He had a 20-something-year-old macaw and a cat that he needed to have watched for a weekend while he went away. He brought up a price right away and offered me $300 for the entire weekend. I accepted that offer because that was a fair deal. I have experience dealing with birds of all types, including macaws, but this would be my first time I'd ever watched one for an entire weekend. I met Jeremy at his house. It was a basic, normal corner house for the neighborhood. He was a short man in his late 50s if I had to guess. He had graying hair and a graying mustache. He seemed very friendly. In my experience, most animal lovers are. After meeting Jeremy, I met his bird Ringo and his cat Casper. Ringo was huge. I've handled macaws in the past, which I assumed was part of the reason Jeremy hired me. He told me about Ringo's personality and quirks and how to get him to quiet down if he makes noises. Ringo kept saying "Daddy's home" as Jeremy would handle him. He laughed and said that's what he says when he sees him. Ringo said a few other phrases along with that, all of them 2- or 3-word phrases. After showing me how to clean the cage and everything like that, he showed me the rest of the house and told me how often to feed Casper. He asked that I don't go into any other bedrooms upstairs besides the guest bedroom where I'd be sleeping, which was understandable. There was a bathroom upstairs right next to the bedroom, and he told me I could help myself to his food. However, I'm a vegan, so I brought my own food for the weekend. After all of this and him getting to know me a bit, he gave me the key to the house and left. I watched through the window as he drove off, and I was left alone with Ringo and Casper. It was already late in the day at this point, like 8 p.m. It was dark out, so there wasn't much left to do that night. Casper was already fed, and Jeremy already left enough food in Ringo's cage for the night. The cage was in the living room in the center of the house, right next to the TV, so I turned on the TV and plopped down on the couch. Casper was hiding somewhere in the house out of sight. Ringo was just sitting in the cage watching me. After a couple of hours of watching TV and eating my little dinner, I went to bed. No reason to stay up super late. I slept with the bedroom door open, and I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound. The best way I could describe it was 2 loud cracking sounds. I sat up and listened for a second. Nothing, so I laid back down and went back to sleep. There was a giant bird in a cage downstairs. Hearing sounds was not unexpected. The next day was pretty easy. I cleaned up Casper's litter box, fed him, and fed Ringo. I let Ringo out to play for a couple of hours. He perched on the back of the couch behind me as I watched TV. Jeremy told me that Casper and Ringo typically ignore each other, so I wouldn't have to worry about one attacking the other. Fast forward a few hours, and I left the house to go explore the area a little bit. I went for a walk in the park and FaceTimed a couple of my friends. I did a little driving around too and picked up some food for dinner that night before returning to the house. It was around 7 o'clock when I returned. I interacted with the pets for a couple of hours as I ate my dinner and watched TV. Jeremy was supposed to be returning home late tomorrow. I called it a night early again. I went to sleep with the door open again. However, once again, I woke up to a sound. This time, I believe it was the sound of the bedroom door closing. I looked up and saw that the bedroom door was now closed. While the windows were open, there was little to no wind to create a draft. This was weird. I also could hear sounds from downstairs. It sounded like Ringo moving about in his cage, talking. I got out of my bed to check on him and make sure he's okay. As I was walking down the stairs, I heard him talking more clearly. I got to the cage and saw he was wide awake and walking around. I remember what Jeremy told me to do to get him to quiet down, hand him a particular treat. I dug into the bag to grab one, but then he said the phrase, "Daddy's home." I found that odd and slightly unsettling. I put a treat in front of Ringo's face and he grabbed it. This ultimately did end up getting him to stop making noise, but it still felt weird that he'd wake up in the middle of the night. I went back to the bedroom and left the door open. I fell back asleep, and I shit you not, I woke up once again, maybe a little more than an hour later. This time I didn't hear what woke me up, but I looked up in the room in a daze, and in the near pitch black darkness of the room, I saw a black mass in the center of the room, moving away from the bed and out the door. I sat up and almost screamed until I fully came to. I now had to wonder if what I just saw was a hallucination or not. I grabbed my phone to turn on the flashlight, but on the screen, I saw I had gotten a text from Jeremy around an hour ago. It was him telling me that if Ringo makes noises in the middle of the night, it's normal and to ignore it. I stared at my screen, rereading the text at least 10 times. That text was sent conveniently around the same time I got up to give Ringo a treat. I felt ill all of a sudden. That black mass in the room I just saw. What if that were real? What if it wasn't a hallucination? I got out of bed and turned on the lamp. I started packing my bag as quickly as possible. I didn't bring many clothes, so I was packed very quickly. I quietly went to the bathroom next to grab all my toiletries quick. And then I tiptoed back out of the bathroom, and I was in the near pitch black upstairs hallway with all the bedroom doors. I looked down the hallway, and I could swear I heard the faintest sound coming from one of the bedrooms. I don't know why, but this overwhelming curiosity almost hypnotized me, and I crept down the hall to what I presumed to have been the master bedroom. I put my ear up close to the door, and I heard a rattling sound. It sounded like a bed rocking. He was in there. That fucking creep. I knocked on the door and said, "Jeremy, are you in there?" The rocking sound stopped, and there was now dead silence. I repeated myself, and this time said, "If you're in the house, I need to know right now before I leave." Still silence. I left the house in a hurry, leaving the key on the table, and I didn't look back. On my drive home, I sent him a long voice text saying I'm considering reporting this to the authorities as some sort of stalker or breach of privacy situation, and that I was extremely disturbed that he was in the house. He immediately tried calling me 3 times, but I was honestly too scared to pick up. He then sent me a text apologizing and stating that his brother unexpectedly came home that night. I knew it was complete horseshit. I demanded he just pay me and I won't pursue this any further. He sent me a payment via Zelle, and that was that. I hate to even mention this part, but the next day, I realized I was missing a certain article of clothing from my bag that I know for a fact was grabbed out of my bag by him. I have largely chosen to block this memory out. This will be the first and last time I ever write a detailed recounting of this experience. I'm part of this group that's centered around doing outdoorsy activities like hiking, snowboarding, mountain climbing, and so on. It started as a Facebook group and evolved into a closer-knit group of people, around 10 of us. Not all 10 or so people go to every outing, obviously. We once organized a trip to Adirondack Park where we could climb one of the many mountain trails. On this trip, it was only 4 of us, DeVito, James, and Christina. We brought sleeping bags and 2 tents. Since James and I were the only guys on this trip, we carried the extra weight of the tents in our bags. Because we wanted to experience this during the beautiful fall foliage, we went in the month of October. The weather was perfect, but still, once it started getting dark, we couldn't continue on the path, and we'd have to set up camp before it would get too dark to do even that. We set up camp on a hard rocky surface, and 3 of us started collecting wood for a little fire. James poured some lighter fluid into the pile of sticks and wood we collected, and that helped get it going. Sitting around the fire, we started to eat whatever foods we had packed while recounting about previous trips we'd taken together. That's when it first happened. A scream from the distance, a woman's scream. A scream that sounded as though someone was being attacked or feared for their lives echoed down the mountain. The 4 of us fell silent and looked at each other. Any of us who had food in our mouths had stopped chewing. We were all just frozen for a few seconds. The scream didn't repeat. We broke the silence by asking what we should do. We should have been alone this far into the trail. Then another sound echoed down the mountain, this one a loud popping sound. It didn't sound like a gunshot at all, but the best any of us could describe it was this high-pitched, loud, single popping sound. We now agreed to put the fire out and get in our tents. We didn't know who was out there or what was going on, and we didn't want to advertise our presence. I shared a tent with James while the girls shared the other tent. Falling asleep in a sleeping bag is always a tough task for me, and when you add hearing a blood-curdling scream out in the middle of nowhere not too far from you, it just makes it even harder. It was an hour or two that passed, and James seemed to have already fallen asleep. I was still rolling around from side to side, uncomfortable, when I heard another woman scream. This one was higher pitched and much, much closer. I sat up and looked at James, who was apparently woken up by the scream. We were scared to even leave the tent, because the scream was borderline right outside our campsite. We were discussing if we should wake the girls and pack it up and leave, but we'd have a long hike back in the dark ahead of us. We then heard footsteps outside our tent, the sound of shoes hitting the stone floor below us. I called both DeVito and Christina's names, expecting it to be them. But when they didn't answer and the footsteps stopped right outside the tent, I looked at James, who looked back at me with an equally horrified look on his face. Someone then started shaking our tent violently, and James and I started to scream, and we could hear the girls screaming in their tent as well in reaction to our screams. I said on the count of 3, we leave the tent and fight whoever was out there. I yelled my count to 3, and on 2, the shaking stopped. By 3, I unzipped the door to the tent, and the 2 of us crawled out from it expecting to see someone standing out there, but they had already disappeared into the darkness, probably still watching us. We ran to the girls' tent yelling their names, saying we gotta go. They crawled out with their backpacks and followed us. We went back for our backpacks too after seeing them with theirs, even though our lives could have been in danger. After grabbing our bags and leaving the tents and sleeping bags, we somehow navigated down the mountain through the dark without flashlights on, relying only on moonlight. We had to stop and sit multiple times to rest, but we never stopped to sleep again. Not like we even had the option anymore. Plus, we were paranoid that we were being tailed. We had to just keep moving for hours until we made it back to the car. James drove us 20 minutes down the road before stopping, and then we slept in the car. We all woke up past noon because of how much walking we did and how late we finally got to fall asleep. We told the whole group about it the next day on the drive home. To our knowledge, nothing ever came up on the news about any kind of murders or weird happenings in the Adirondacks around that time. It was in October of 2017 if anyone wants to do some detective work of their own. This still holds up as the scariest and overall worst night of my life. My uncle is notorious in my family for being a daredevil and always worrying my mom, other uncles, and grandma, especially considering he's been on multiple medications for decades. He's what you'd call an adrenaline junkie, and he's climbed over 5 mountains in his life, most notably Everest. Well, he's attempted Everest, but he didn't make it to the top. Something in his living on edge personality and mentality slightly changed after he attempted to climb Everest. I was just 10 years old when he did, and even I remember the change. It wasn't until 5 years later that I was told just what happened on Everest. My uncle went alone on his expedition, which may have been his biggest mistake. He said he stayed at base camp for a full day before continuing his climb beyond that point. At first his climb was easy, he says, and as one would imagine, it got gradually more difficult. Even though it's a well-known fact that many bodies of previous climbers are still to be found on the mountain, my uncle says he never expected to actually find one. He entered the death zone, which is the area of the mountain where the high altitude results in a lack of available oxygen for humans to breathe. This is usually above 8,000 meters, and most of the 200-plus climbers who've died on Everest have died in the death zone. People are advised to not stay in the death zone for more than 16 to 20 hours. While in this zone, my uncle saw his first dead body lodged in a ravine, and being the happy, uppity, bubbly person he is, it was a shock and truly disturbing to him. He described his mood change from, in his words, feeling alive and on top of the world, to in over his head and mortal. Nevertheless, he progressed onward, and when he was tired, he took a break and sat down. Seeing the corpse really messed with his head, and he mentioned that he was also starting to feel dizzy and lightheaded, likely due to the high altitude. My uncle didn't want to get up from his position. He felt like he was losing energy and began talking to himself. My uncle finally got up from his seated position after an hour and decided he didn't have it in him to make it up to the top. He started to make his way down, until another climber bumped into him and started telling him to come on, let's go, passing him and climbing further up the mountain where my uncle just came from. My uncle told the man he was not up for it and was going to make his way back down to base camp. He recounts that as the man spoke back to him, urging him to continue up the mountain, his voice was very echoey and surreal. My uncle said take care to the man and continue back down the way he came with his head spinning and feeling short of breath. As he continued his way down, every time he'd look up, the man would be behind him, smiling and making hand motions for my uncle to come back up. He thought smiling and ignoring it would be the best way to get him to leave him alone. After continuously looking back to that man following him, my uncle finally stopped and started firmly telling the man he wasn't feeling well and just wanted to get back to base camp. The man slightly above my uncle smiled once more and said, "Watch me go over the ledge." Then he walked to the edge of the snow and leaped down, disappearing under the edge. My uncle said that as he saw this, it snapped him out of his daze and he ran over to the edge to look down it. But there was nobody to be seen sliding down the edge of the mountain, no marks in the snow. He didn't even hear the sound of him sliding down the snow initially or anything. Witnessing this made my uncle hurry down the mountain even faster, until the next thing he remembered was darkness, then waking up at the base camp medical clinic in a bed. He had passed out and a couple passerbys found him and carried him down low enough to where a rescue helicopter could reach him. My uncle waited until the end of the story to tell me that he was off his meds for the entire trip, and mixed with the lack of air in the death zone, he started to quickly hallucinate and talk to himself. Upon getting home, he did some research on recent deaths on the mountain, and learned of a young man who had died climbing Everest that same week who looked just like the man in the hallucination. This is when he started to question if it was actually a hallucination or not. However, the death was reported before my uncle had this alleged hallucination. He still says he's not entirely sure what he saw was a hallucination. I don't press him for more details about this story, as like I said, it's changed him and it's clearly left some kind of mental scar on him. I can't imagine how horrific of an experience this was for him. I once drove up to Banff National Park in Canada for a day of hiking and climbing. The park is home to numerous mountain climbing trails and is a scenic escape from the city for me to clear my head. I was going through a recent breakup and wanted to get out and get my mind off of it, and I thought this was the best way to do that. I had all my necessary tools in my climbing pack, including rope, a helmet, harness, quick draws, and whatever else I could fit in the bag. I hiked through half a mile of forest until I found a good rock wall I wanted to scale. So I found a strong enough tree to use as my anchor point and wrapped some rope around it. You may be asking why I started from the top instead of the bottom. Well, normally if I were on a known route, there would be eye bolts that are anchored into the rock that I could have just clipped my carabiner to, and when the carabiner is attached, then I'd clip my rope. As I climb up, I would place another carabiner or anchor and so on. But since I was making my own route on this day, I had to anchor at the top of the climb, which is called top roping, and rappel myself down to set each bolt. At the end of all of this, I'll be at the bottom and able to climb up after setting my own route. After I was all set to go, I started to rappel down the face and set my bolts. To skip all the mountain climbing terminology and talk, as I rappelled down, I eventually came across a cave in the face. It was literally this big hole in the mountain wall, but it seemed unusual to me because usually a cave entrance is ground level. I was intrigued, so I climbed inside of it. I had plenty of rope to allow me to go inside. I was sitting at the edge of this opening, looking inside, and it got pitch black in there not too far from the entrance. I wondered how big this cave was, and if it led to a separate entrance on the other side of the mountain. But more importantly, I picked up on this buzzing sound from deeper in the cave. It was this very low note kind of buzzing, like you'd almost miss it if you weren't paying attention. I walked very slowly deeper into the cave, and as the humming got slightly louder, I said hello into the cave. Not because I was expecting an answer from anyone, nor did I want an answer. I wanted to see how much of an echo there would be, to give me an idea of how deep this cave went. And there was quite a loud echo. But on top of that, the humming or buzzing sound stopped after I said it. I was creeped out, no doubt, but I was still intrigued as to what that buzzing sound could have been. I stepped just a little more into the cave, the rope starting to wedge at the top of the cave entrance now. I started to hear this slow, deep breathing, and I suddenly knew I wasn't in the cave alone. Perhaps there was an animal in there. I started to back away slowly out of the cave. When I felt I was close enough to the entrance of the cave, I took out my flashlight from my backpack, aimed it into the cave, and my finger quivered over the button for a few seconds. In a moment of poor judgment but pure curiosity, I turned the flashlight on and the cave lit up a bit. At first I thought it was just an empty cave, until I noticed the two heads peering to me from behind the curved cave wall. I could only see half their faces, but they looked sickly and decrepit. The way they were watching me. They were in the dark seconds ago, impossible for me to see, but them able to see me perfectly standing by the light near the entrance of the cave. I turned off the flashlight and ran for it back out of the cave. I started to climb back up the face when I felt a grip around my ankle trying to pull me back into the cave. I kicked as hard as I could at my attacker, and I felt my shoe hit their face. In response, the sickly looking person let go, and I heard him make this horrible shriek of pain. He sounded less human and more like some literal cave-dwelling monster. I didn't look down. I climbed the rock wall faster than I'd ever climbed. I don't think either of those two barely human things I saw in that cave attempted to come out and grab me. I made it back to the top in a surprisingly quick amount of time due to adrenaline. The reason I didn't just allow the rope to safely descend me down to the bottom instead of climbing to the top was because I feared they would grab the rope and pull me back up. I carved 2 big X's at the top of the face, and then 2 more at the bottom, indicating to whoever passes by here not to climb here. I hiked my way all the way back to the side of the road where I parked my car. I had a long drive home lost in my thoughts, appreciating my life and scared shitless, wondering what the hell was wrong with those people in that cave. Why were they in there, and what were they going to do to me? I'm telling you, they looked pale and sickly. They were not regular people. I called the park warden's number and gave them the coordinates of the cave and told them about the dangerous, sickly-looking people hiding in there. I'll tell you one thing though, this experience definitely took my mind off my breakup for a while. I was assigned as a security guard with the midnight shift at a very large Omaha warehouse when I was a young man. This building was mainly used for storage and it was huge. We as security personnel were tasked with hitting several stations inside this building on the night shift, and this required that we did a lot of walking. There would always be 2 personnel assigned to the warehouse at night, 1 patrolling the outside perimeter in a car, and 1 inside the warehouse on foot. Being outside, sitting in the comfort of a car was obviously the more desirable of the 2. I was working a Wednesday night. I was about half an hour into my shift. I would start the shifts walking around for about an hour, just surveilling the place before sitting down in one of the security offices. This room had some low-budget, ancient camera system that at the time was impressive technology, but it only had 2 screens because there were only 2 cameras in the entire warehouse, 1 in the northeast corner and 1 in the southwest corner. That's why we couldn't just sit on our butts in the security office our entire shifts and had to actually patrol the place. This was a shared warehouse for some tech companies, and a lot of expensive equipment was held here, hence why 2 security guards would have to be there every single night. The warehouse layout was similar to that of a regular grocery store. There were like 10 to 15 aisles, and 1 intersecting aisle that cuts between the other 10 to 15 in the middle. I was still making my initial rounds around the place, when I saw all the way down at the end of the aisle I was in, something at the end section. It was like this white thing that kind of resembled the shape of a head, and it was poking out from behind the end section. Mind you, it was so far away that all I could make from it was this white-looking object. I elevated my slow stroll to a moderately quick speed walk, and halfway through the aisle, the white thing disappeared behind the tower of boxes. This confirmed my fear that it was a person, and that I wasn't alone in there. I now ran to the end of the aisle, hoping to see the other night guard walking around or something. As I stood in the southwest corner of this giant warehouse, I looked up at the camera in the corner, and it was pointing in the direction of the thing I just saw. I looked in that direction, and there it was again, at maybe the 7th aisle, that white thing I saw earlier. Now it was a lot closer, and I could make it out to be someone's face, as I feared. But it wasn't the other security guard. It was this extremely pale, ghoulish-looking face. They once again slowly hid their face behind the tower of boxes. I walkie-talkied the other guard on duty, and he radioed back that he was in the car by the back section of the parking lot. He said roger that, he'd be here in 5. Getting off the phone with him, I was nervous to approach the aisle that I saw the person's head. Even though this is exactly what a security guard's purpose and job is, you never actually expect or anticipate seeing any action. I took a deep breath and ran to that aisle and stopped at the end of it to look down it. The person wasn't in sight. I figured they must have ran for it. So I ran halfway down hoping to catch up to them, but I stopped when I smelt this horrible putrid odor. It smelled like a dead, rotting carcass. I followed the scent until it became overwhelming and I found the source of it. It was coming from this big wooden box that was different from the rest of the boxes. I pulled the lid off the box, and inside was a dead body laying in a pool of blood. The most shocking part of it was that it was missing a head. I walkie-talkied to the other security guard again, and yelled at him to call the police and report a dead body in the warehouse. I said this all while running as fast as I could to the back exit of the warehouse, struggling to get enough air. I threw up the second I made it out the door. I ran to the other security guard's car and sat in there with him, gasping for air. He was still on the phone with the police, so I took the phone and told them whatever the other security guy didn't. Given the nature of the situation, they sent like 5 or 6 cop cars and basically had the entire place surrounded. The body was loaded into an ambulance, and for a good chunk of the night, police were in the warehouse doing forensic work. Perhaps the weirdest part of all of this was that when trying to go back to the video footage captured from the night before, the footage cut out for about 3 hours in the middle of the night. There was no explanation for this happening. I've thought about this night for almost my entire life, basically. I don't believe in ghosts or anything, but I don't really have an explanation for this. I've thought about some far-fetched possibilities, though, like that whoever the murderer was in the warehouse that night and was holding up the severed head of that body, hence why it looks so pale and ghoulish. In fact, it gave me chills just now thinking about it again. Several years ago, 2 friends and I heard from a mutual friend about this creepy abandoned warehouse or furniture store that was only a few miles from my house. One night while on a drive, the 3 of us decided to check it out. We parked at a Walgreens a few hundred yards from the warehouse and started walking towards it. As we got closer, my friend, I'll call him Jim, kinda chickened out and stayed back while me and my other friend, I'll call Mark, continued on. As we approached the right side of the building, it became very obvious that this place had been abandoned for a very long time. The front entrance was boarded up, and there were vines and ivy growing all over the building. Our mutual friend said that the only way in was through a busted-in wall in the back. We went around back, and sure enough, there was a broken-in narrow section of wall we could get in through. We stepped in, and it was completely dark. We couldn't see our hands in front of our faces, so we turned on the flashlights on our phones and looked around. There was trash and debris everywhere on the concrete floors. We were in what appeared to be the main room of the old store, and it was huge. An entire football field could probably fit in this room. We could even hear an echo when we talked. We started looking along the walls, which were covered in graffiti. The graffiti was littered with what must have been gang symbols as well as profanity, as you would expect. What was really unsettling, though, was that as we moved further along the back wall, the graffiti was getting more and more disturbing. One of them read, "Kill yourself tonight." Then the graffiti was getting satanic. There were tons of inverted crosses, pentagrams, 666s, and violent scenes depicted. While this stuff was creepy enough, it wasn't the worst of what we saw. Towards the end of the building, there were some steps leading to smaller rooms. As we shone our lights on the steps, we saw a large, dry pool of what was probably blood all over the steps. This deterred us from exploring the smaller rooms beyond, so we headed to the left side of the room. As we were walking, our lights caught something hanging from the ceiling. We got closer and saw what it was. It was a noose, still hanging from one of the rafters. It became very obvious that the people that come to this place use it for very evil purposes. After that, we decided we'd spend enough time in there and headed for the hole in the wall we entered through. We got outside and saw that there was another, smaller building/warehouse behind the main one. Despite the freaky things we saw inside, we were still curious and decided to check this one out too. One thing that was very odd was that there was a small room in the front of the warehouse that had no doors, only one window. Inside was a large inverted cross hanging from the decrepit ceiling. We came to the left side of the warehouse where the large garage-style entrance was. This building was similar to the first one. It was one large empty room with tons of trash everywhere. There was more disturbing graffiti. However, there were these holes at the base of the walls that were really odd-looking. We shined our lights down them but couldn't see the bottom. What were these for? We had seen enough at this point and headed back outside. It was then that my friend Mark got a call from Jim. As he was talking to Jim, his face suddenly changed to a downright horrified expression. I said, "What's wrong?" What he said next sent a chill down my spine. "Someone else is here," he said. Before we could even turn to run, a white truck peeled around the corner at an alarming speed, heading right towards us. We started booking it towards my car, and as we got around the other back corner of the building, we saw another black truck parked alongside. But we kept running as fast as we could, and thankfully the three of us made it back to my car. We got in and peeled out of there. I don't know what those guys in the trucks were there for, or why they chased after us, but based on what we saw in those buildings, it wasn't anything good. Thankfully, we never found out, and we never returned to that place. In my mid-20s, I used to be a party planner and event coordinator. I was basically in charge of throwing dope parties for this record label group. I'd have to rent out venues for a night or weekends, which would allow us to host our events in these places. Usually we wouldn't pay until after the event, and the landlord or owner of whatever property we were using would take a cut of the profits. There was this one time that my group rented this big warehouse for an entire weekend, and we would be hosting parties Friday and Saturday night. Once the place was rented out, I had to do a lot of setting up, which included setting up tables for bottle service, setting up portable bars, and a DJ stand. A lot of work would go into these kinds of pop-up venues, but they were always extremely profitable. My buddy Jack, who was also on the event planning team, was helping me on the Wednesday before the party weekend. He drove a truck full of equipment to the empty parking lot that the warehouse sat in. I was having trouble figuring out how to get the power to a certain part of the warehouse activated. I looked for any kind of electrical panel or circuit breaker box, but I was having trouble finding one. I gave the building owner I dealt with a call, and he picked up almost right away. His name's Carter. He told me exactly where to go for the electrical panel that would turn on the specific lights I was looking for. He directed me to a door that had an exit sign on top of it, but it wasn't on. Through this door, I was in a very short, very narrow space with a door on one side which I presume led to the outside, and then a half flight of stairs on the other side. I was supposed to go down this half flight of stairs, which led to another tight space with a couple doors. This room was hard to explain without just seeing it for yourself. I'm 6'4", so I had to bend down a little bit just so my head wouldn't hit the ceiling. That's how cramped it was down there. This level had very dim nightlight kind of lights hung on the ceiling. Dim but enough light to navigate just fine. I found the electrical panel, and Carter told me exactly which switches to flip. Then I shut the panel door and turned the key to lock it, even though he told me to just leave the key in the lock. I thanked him and our call ended. I heard a loud and obvious buzzing sound that would be going off in spasms. I followed the sound of it to a door leading to a pitch-black room. Pulling the door open was hard as it scraped against the concrete floor. There was this red light in the top corner of the room that synchronized with the buzzing sound. When the buzzing stopped, the light would also turn off. I was trying to figure out what it was, but it didn't make sense. I stepped deeper into the room and noticed whenever I moved, the light would turn on and the buzzing would sound. When I stood still, it stopped. I don't know why, but I was creeped out. So I went back to the doorway of the room. I took one more look inside, and the red light turned on again, lighting up the room with this eerie red glow. I decided to call Carter and tell him about the potential problem with the light and the buzzing. He told me calmly that the light was a motion sensor, and the buzzing was because that one in the basement was busted. I asked what he meant by motion sensor, and he explained that there's at least one in every room in the building, as it's part of the security system. I looked back into the room, and the light was still on. I asked what could be setting it off in there, and he said he had no idea. And that's when I spotted it. There was someone, I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman because of the long disheveled hair, sitting in one corner of this room, half hidden behind a pile of old boxes. Their eyes were the most noticeable feature because of how goddamn wide they were open. The mouth was like a half smile, and they were moving their arm in a manner that was as if to tell me to come here. I know it took me a few seconds to describe this person just now, but I was literally screaming at the sight of them in under a second. I slammed that door shut and ran back up the stairs and out that exit door. I told Carter we were leaving and not using the warehouse anymore. I didn't ask any more questions after that. I didn't care, it was his problem. I yelled at Jack to get everything he could back into the truck. We collected our stuff as quickly as possible, loaded the truck back up, and left. I didn't even bother locking the door to the warehouse. I just wanted to be far away from there. I still today don't know what to make of it. The Carter guy seemed so weirdly calm about my telling him about a deranged-looking person in the basement of his warehouse. Thinking back, that light was probably going off because of that person sitting in the corner waving me over or doing whatever the hell he or she was doing with their arm. It was a truly nightmare-inducing, horrible experience. I'm a big solo traveler. My friends are usually too busy or can't afford to constantly fly to a million different places, so I do a lot of it myself. I flew to San Diego for my first time alone. I'd been to most of the major cities in California except for San Diego, so I wanted to check it off my bucket list. I stayed in a decent hotel very close to downtown. As I checked in, I met a guy a little older than me in the lobby. He struck up a conversation with me about where I was from, how long I'd be here for, and if I'd ever been here. It was apparently his second time here, and he was also alone. He offered to take my bags to my room for me, since he was going upstairs anyway. I accepted his offer, appreciating his kind gesture. He carried my bags to the elevator, and we went to the second floor to my room. He set my bags down outside my door and said it was great meeting me and to enjoy my stay here. I thanked him again, and he left down the hall. I let myself into the room, set my bags on the bed, and laid down for a bit just to get a quick nap in. When I felt refreshed, I went back down to the lobby and was about to head outside when the lady working the front desk called me over. She asked what that man did when we went upstairs, and I told her he just helped me with my bags to my room. She then warned me that that man had been standing outside the hotel for a while, and she noticed him come in moments after I came inside. She told me that she was fairly certain he wasn't staying in the hotel, and if I see him again, I should stay away from him. This was of course very unsettling. I hoped she was wrong and he was actually just a nice person, but to be safe, I would listen to her. I went out and explored and had myself a day. I came back a few hours later to change into different clothes for dinner. There was a different person working the front desk now. In the hotel room, I showered quickly, then changed into different clothes and laid down for another quick power nap. During this time, there was a knock at the door to my room, followed by a quiet male's voice saying housekeeping. I didn't order housekeeping, and it was my first day there. Maybe they had the wrong room. I went to check the peephole of the door, and I didn't see anyone in the hall. That was beyond strange. Then, immediately, that man from earlier came into my head. What if it was him? I ignored the knocks and went to my phone to call the front desk and ask them if they had sent housekeeping to my room. And of course, they said no. So I asked for someone to be sent to my room for my own safety, and 5 minutes later, a hotel maid knocked on the door. I opened it and explained politely the situation to her, and thanked her for coming. I then left the hotel to go to dinner. After dinner, I did a city lights night tour, and explored some of the happening areas of the city at night. I got back to the hotel room around 10. I went up to the front desk worker and then explained what happened earlier, with the man I met who I feared may have been pretending to be room service to get into my room. I then asked her if she had seen anyone of his description walking around the lobby, and she said no. And to make me feel better, she checked the live surveillance camera of my floor, and no one was in the halls. I thanked her and went upstairs to my floor and then to my room. I changed out of my clothes and laid in bed and put on the TV so I could fall asleep to something. Within the hour, I was drifting into a sleep. What I was hearing from the TV was kind of turning into a dream in my half-asleep state. So when I heard a door closing, it became part of my dream. I didn't actually wake up until I felt the mattress start shifting as something was putting weight on the other side. I looked over my shoulder to the other side of the bed, and I saw a man in a black COVID mask and baseball hat getting onto the bed, reaching for me. He grabbed me, trying to cover my mouth so I couldn't scream, but I managed to fight him off for long enough to scream bloody murder. He continued to try to cover my mouth, but I kept struggling and resisting just long enough for someone to start knocking on the door. I screamed help, and by this point, surely the man knew this wasn't going to go his way anymore. He let go of me and opened the door and shoved the woman who was knocking to the floor, and she saw him run down the hall to the stairs. The woman came in to make sure I was okay, as I was in complete shock, followed by tears. Others from neighboring rooms came to see what the commotion was about. Hotel staff came as well, and the police were called. Based on the hotel video footage, the man somehow acquired a master key which allowed him to access my room. The mask and hat hid his identity, but I strongly believe it to be the man who helped me with my bags the first day. I believe he wanted to find out what room I was in to later come back to. It's scary to think he may have done this successfully to somebody else. I tried my best to enjoy the rest of my trip, even though I went through something that will likely stay with me for the rest of my life. The hotel gave me a full reimbursement for the entire stay, and they gave me a different room to stay in. Honestly, looking back, I probably should have pressed charges on the hotel. The hotel, of course, also gave all the necessary footage to the police department. I haven't ever been contacted to identify anybody, which sadly more than likely means the man was never properly identified or caught. The events of this story take place a few years ago, maybe in 2013 or 2014. Honestly, I don't remember because the story is such a blur and I've eventually just blocked it out over the years. It was Christmas break and I was a freshman in college attending a university in New York City. With that being said, I was miles apart from my family who lived all the way in Bulgaria. For some of you who may not know where that is, Bulgaria is just a small country in Eastern Europe, right by Romania and Greece. Bulgaria's safety reputation and regulation isn't really that good, but this story actually contrasts that. I was at JFK Airport, maybe just a few days before Christmas Eve, because my initial plan was to surprise my family and friends in Bulgaria. The airport very obviously was packed and loaded with a lot of people, making my traveling experience way more complex and difficult. After hours of security, luggage weighing, and waiting for time to pass, I finally was at rest when the first plane to Istanbul from Manhattan was setting off. The first plane ride was around 8 hours, so I was prepared to be somewhat miserable and sore for the classic economic seating arrangement. I was sat next to two men, unfortunately. For the record, I'm a 5 feet, 110-something pound woman, which didn't make it any better either. These two men were probably well over a foot taller than me and could easily overpower me. The man on the right to me was relatively quiet, black hair, glasses, and low-key ripped. The guy on the left to me, however, freaked me out. He would occasionally mumble to himself quietly, and he would pick at his skin, sometimes even nudging his arm close to mine. I took note of the guy to the left of me and tried my best to have a decent 8-hour flight. The only thing keeping me productive was the fact that I'd be in my home country in less than 48 hours. But this productiveness got trimmed short, when I'd be minding my business, maybe doing work or listening to music, and the guy left of me would be very bluntly staring at me. I tried shrugging it off. Maybe he has a disability that made him lack social cues. But as time went on, I started to doubt that. At some point during the flight, I was watching season 2 of American Horror Story, and the man began speaking to me, asking why I was watching a show that poorly represents the mentally ill, murderers, and whatnot. Very nervously and hastily, I asked him if he needed anything, since it's inappropriate to randomly disturb a stranger who's minding their own business. The season of American Horror Story I was watching was Asylum, which portrays cold-blooded murderers and insane people of a mental hospital. The guy looked me straight in the eye and said very candidly, "I just think it's fucked up how everyone thinks people who skin others alive are crazy. I mean, aren't we all like that?" I mentally began freaking out, asking myself who the hell was I sitting next to, and did anyone else hear that? I chuckled, brushing it off to seem unbothered. For the rest of the flight, I was scared shitless, and I contemplated asking for an open seat that may have been available by the back of the plane. But nonetheless, the flight came to an end and we arrived in Istanbul. I gathered my stuff as quickly as I could and escorted myself out of the plane as soon as possible. Now, I wish I could say the story ends there, but unfortunately it does not. The rest of my Christmas was fine, but what that man said still rung in my head like a bell. As January approached, I began packing up again to head back to New York. I was sorting out my tote bag and throwing out any old trash I may have stuffed in there from traveling, when I came across a disgusting note that must have been slipped in there when I was sleeping. It read the following: "I wish I could see what you look like under your skin. I really wish I took a picture of it as evidence, because only a month later into February, there was a news article that my younger sister sent to me that basically talked about the same exact man from my plane ride being sent to jail for multiple accounts of rape, attempted rape, kidnapping, attempted kidnapping, and first-degree murder in Istanbul." Reading that article made me sick to my stomach, and honestly, that whole experience drove me to just stay home for the holidays for a few years. winter of 2018, to escape the cold weather, my girlfriend Claire and I took a week off from our jobs to go away to a nice beach resort in Mexico, where the water was crystal blue and the weather was perfect. The resort was extremely affordable for a 7-day all-inclusive package. It had a buffet, 3 pools, was on the beach, had 1 million bars, an entertainment hall, and tons of group excursions. We were going to be there for a whole week, so we had a lot planned. The first couple days we relaxed around the resort, getting use out of the unlimited drinks package. The surrounding area of the resort was a lot of jungle and scenic looking roads, so we took a private shuttle on the 3rd day to the nearest car rental place. The shuttle driver warned us not to stray too far from the coast, as there are a lot of unsafe areas. We rented a Ford Fiesta. There weren't exactly any Mustangs or Camaros at this rental place. The car rental place was in a small city about 5 miles up the road from the resort. There was basically this one long road that ran along a bunch of resorts, and next to this road was miles of jungle and occasional small towns. We drove south on the road until we ended up in Tulum. The actual city of Tulum was less appealing than I had imagined, considering a lot of my friends were always talking about wanting to go there. We drove through the Tulum area and then back up north. We found a dirt road into a jungle area, and decided to just drive through it and see where it goes. On either side of us was just jungle, probably for miles. We drove down this wide dirt road, enjoying the scenery and little off-roading experience, though Claire seemed to think we shouldn't be on a dirt road like this in a rental in fear of dirtying it up, and I agreed. So we did a 3-point turn and started heading back in the direction of the main road. Eventually, we were stopped by these 3 men walking out from the jungle onto the road. We both simultaneously said, "Oh no," knowing this could be trouble. I brought the car to a halt and lowered the window a little bit as one of the men came up to it and started speaking in Spanish. I said no hablo español, and things started to get a little heated. One of the other men came to Claire's window and knocked on it. I told her not to lower it. The guy at my window started saying money, money, and I saw the one man still in front of the car making his way to my window as well, and he pulled a knife out of his right pocket. I stepped on the gas and the car jumped forward. The 3 men were yelling and running after us, but obviously they couldn't run faster than a car. Our hearts were in our throats from that encounter. I didn't let up on the gas until we made it off the dirt road. After that, we didn't really want to drive around anymore. We brought the car to the resort parking lot and left it there. We didn't want to return it yet, especially since the rentals there were so cheap anyway. The next day, after talking with some of the workers at the resort, who recommended a beautiful nearby cenote to check out, we drove the car to another similar looking dirt path very close to the resort. We followed the workers' directions and drove all the way to the end of the dirt road, then parked when we saw a sign for the cenote. We found it without issue, and we were the only ones here surprisingly. We didn't see any other cars. We followed the signs down this beautiful scenic pathway. It was a truly peaceful experience that unfortunately had to be ruined when we started feeling like we were being watched. I don't mean we have some 6th sense. I mean we literally heard rustling and footsteps from all around us in the jungle. I told her let's just keep walking. We continued to follow the signs, and out from nowhere, a man came up to us, once again speaking Spanish. When I again responded no hablo español, he started to attempt to speak in English, and I understood him to be trying to tell us to come with him, that he'd lead us to the cenote. Claire and I looked at each other nervously, and we followed the man. He was leading us a different way than we were originally going. It seemed like we weren't following the signs anymore. Claire tapped me on the shoulder and then pointed at the man's back pocket. There was the handle of a large knife in his back pocket. I whispered to her to run, and then pushed her to start running, and I followed close behind. The man noticed and started running after us, but thank the Lord he was slow. We were easily outrunning him. We made it back to the car, and at first I thought he'd stop chasing us, but as soon as we got in the car, 3 people emerged from the path we just came from and tried opening the car doors. They then started hitting the glass trying to break the windows open. Before any of them could actually break the windows, we were already moving. Claire was crying. Hell, I wanted to cry too. 2 days in a row of this. We officially hated this place. We brought the car back to the rental shop, and luckily there weren't any dents or anything from being pounded on, just some dirt stains. We shuttled back to the resort from there, and we didn't leave the resort again until we left days later for the airport. We warned the resort staff about the attack so they could warn the guests. We haven't returned to Mexico since, but I'm honestly not sure if we ever will. Even in what was supposed to be a safer area by the resorts, 2 days in a row we barely escaped being robbed and attacked. For the past 3 years or so, I've worked as an overnight security guard at a mall. It used to be that the mall didn't require an overnight person, but vandalism started to become a problem. Most of the time I would drive around the parking lot all night listening to my car radio. Now and then I'd kick some skateboarders out of the parking lot or investigate a suspicious person lurking about. Other than that, I'd say the job was pretty tame. Maybe 3 months in, I experienced something a little bit stranger. I noticed that the light to one of the shops was on while driving around the parking lot. This was surprising to me considering no one had snuck past me as of yet. So of course I parked the car and headed inside the mall to catch the potential thieves. As I approached the shop, I didn't hear the sound of anyone rummaging through the inventory. Sure enough, the shop was empty. As a matter of fact, even the security gate was still down. Only the shop owners had access to the security gates, so I couldn't really do anything about the light being on. I headed back out to my car. I'd say an hour went by with no incident, but as I was circling around the entrance to the mall, I saw another light was on inside. Inside the mall, it was the same scene repeated. The light was onto the shop, but the security gate was still closed. I even tugged on the damn thing to see if someone heard me coming and just hid from me. Nope, it was locked. I heard a click from behind me while investigating. The previous light was no longer on. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, but I swear I saw someone run behind the counter and hide. I think about now is a good time to mention I was running on 3 hours of sleep for the past 48 hours, and I was blaming these occurrences just simply on the lack of sleep. I shined my flashlight into the shop and scanned the area. Nothing that I could see. Behind me was another click. Once again, the light to the shop was off, and this time I know I saw someone standing in there. So I simply called out, "You can either leave with me or you can leave with the police." They didn't move, just stood next to the light switch. I approached the gate and turned my light in the direction of the light switch, and there was no one standing there. I did see that a clothes rack was fairly close to the switch, so maybe the light was catching the clothes just right and was casting a shadow. That was the most logical explanation I could think of, at least. I left the mall. I was pretty spooked from the events of that night, but after a few months, they were pretty much out of my mind. My patrols were nothing special for a while after that. I think my next incident happened around my 1-year anniversary as a guard. It was winter and I was inside of the mall checking the pipes. Yes, I was on security duty, but the owners decided to save a buck by having me inspect certain things as well. It was whatever. I was heading to one of the bathrooms to relieve myself when I heard a toilet flush. I jumped a little more than I would like to admit. Inside of the bathroom, I didn't see anyone. The toilets in the mall were motion activated, much like every other mall in the world. I checked all of the stalls, empty. I'll spare you the details, but after checking the stalls, I took a seat in one of them. I had a YouTube video playing on my phone while I was sitting. Then I heard a tapping sound coming from the stall next to me. I glanced to my left and saw a pair of shoes standing with the toes pointing towards me. Slowly, I brought my eyes up above the stall. Sure enough, there was the tallest man I'd ever seen standing over the stall, staring down at me. Had I not already been on the toilet, I would have been running home for new pants. When he saw me notice him, he ducked back down beneath the stall. I hopped up and kicked in the door to the neighboring stall. The damn thing was empty, except for a pair of shoes sitting in the same spot I had seen them. My heart was thumping like crazy. I went back to my car as quickly as possible after that. If I remember correctly, this happened at around 4 in the morning. Once again, I accredited all of this to my lack of sleep. I was just happy that I had the next day off. My friend and I once went to the infamous abandoned Rolling Acres Mall in Akron, Ohio. I'll call my friend Jake for this story for privacy reasons. We went at like 11 o'clock at night on a Wednesday night, since we didn't have school the next day. We snuck in through some door which had been jammed in by previous visitors. It was completely pitch black in there, obviously. We turned out our flashlights for a few seconds just to really take in how dark it was. We explored the lower level, then went up to the second level by climbing up an escalator. As we were shining the flashlights into old closed-off stores, we heard a bang-like sound come from further down this upper level. I got scared and asked Jake if it could be security or cops. He said he doubted it, probably just more people like us exploring. But we did still try to move in the opposite direction from the sound just in case. We were right by the JCPenney in the mall when we heard another similar bang-like sound like from before, this time louder and closer. Jake and I turned off our flashlights now just to be safe. We didn't know who that could be. With our lights out, we did the best we could to make a little distance between us and the sound, without banging into walls or anything. Suddenly, I heard a psst. It came from a little further in front of me. It was kind of muffled too. So I assumed it was Jake calling me ahead. I kept hearing him going, psst, psst. So I kept following the sound of it. When I got close enough, I whispered to Jake, "Where do we go now?" He didn't answer. So I started feeling around for him, and I found what I believed to be his shoulder. Only the fabric of the jacket I felt did not match the fabric of the coat I knew Jake was wearing. I turned on the flashlight and screamed when I looked up and saw the person I was holding onto wasn't Jake, but rather some tall guy wearing a beanie and a face mask. The man grabbed me and put me in a headlock as he tried dragging me. Jake came out from the darkness and landed one clean punch to the man's face, which gave me just enough time to take off as he let go of me. Jake and I ran to the same place we came in from, and when we got outside, we continued running until we got to the car. We didn't stop to catch our breath just yet though. Jake booked it out of the abandoned parking lot, and only then did we feel relief. I gave Jake a firm handshake as I laughed and caught my breath, thanking him for potentially saving my life. I used to work in a 24/7 general store in a mall in South Carolina, so while the mall itself would close around 9:30, our store would stay open all night. There were two entrances to the store, one from inside the actual mall itself, and then a back door that people could enter through after the mall closed. Past 9:30, I would always have to shut the gate, separating the store from the mall. Given that this was a smaller store, it was never really busy in the deep night hours, which also made my job very uneventful most of the time. But there was one night shift that turned out to be anything but uneventful. It was towards the middle of my shift. The gate between the store and the mall was down, but I could still see through it obviously into the dark half-lit hallway of the mall. The mall always had night lights on, which were much dimmer but bright enough for the security guards to see what's going on in the cameras. I was doing my own thing, organizing the shelves, making sure everything was neat, when I heard a rattle at the metal cage. I looked and saw some guy standing on the other side, grasping the gate with his hands. At first, I thought it was a security guard on duty. It was the only logical explanation, even though it was rare to ever see them walking around. But as I got closer and asked if there was a problem, I realized it wasn't a security guard. It was just some random man. He was wearing a dirty black and white plaid shirt and very baggy blue jeans. Most notably though, and what made this exceptionally strange, was that he was just looking up at the ceiling. I inched a little closer and again asked if something was wrong, and if he needed help, but he just kept looking up and shaking the gate. Now, there was some kind of protocol I was supposed to follow in the case of something like this in order to get the mall security. However, I didn't know how. I didn't know what number to dial, I didn't know how to work any kind of intercoms, so all I could really do was shut it out. I turned my back to the creepy man and went back to my register behind the counter, as far away from him as possible. Unfortunately, the shelves are angled perpendicularly to the counter, not parallel, so the man at the gate was in direct line of sight from me still. He finally seemed to back away, like literally walked backwards though, with his head still up at the ceiling. All that was going through my mind was where could security be? It was to my understanding that there would be at least one person watching the cameras at night. Anyway, I tried to just move past it, resuming my cleaning activities. I couldn't help but look back outside to the mall every once in a while, though. Thankfully, he was gone now. Eventually, someone came into the shop. I heard the back door slide open. I was in between two shelves and couldn't see them, so I continued with my work. After finishing up sweeping the aisle, I went back to the register to wait for the customer. I saw the customer now. They were standing at the end of the last aisle to the left, the alcohol aisle. He was looking up. At first I thought he was looking at the top shelf, so I looked away. I only looked at him for maybe a second. I bent down under the counter to put the broom and dustpan underneath, and when I stood back up to look at the customer, I felt like my heart nearly stopped. He was looking at me with a smile, not a grin, but a wide lip smile. It also sank in right away now that this was the same man that was out in the mall from earlier, only now he'd apparently taken off his black and white plaid shirt. I stared at him and he stared at me, and I think this went on for 30 seconds. I didn't know what to do, and I had actually frozen up in fear. The face he gave, the smile, was a pure look of horror, something straight from a horror film or someone's nightmares. I felt like he stared into my soul. I opened my mouth to speak, and my voice trembled. I think I said, "Get out or I'm calling the cops." He didn't move. He didn't even bat an eye. I ran to the back room and locked the door so I could call my manager. She wouldn't pick up after several attempts, though. When I gave up, I heard a tap at the door. Not a knock, just a very gentle tap. I sat like a nervous wreck in that back room for a good 5 minutes, wanting to be anywhere but there. But when the fear of this person stealing a bunch of items and losing my job became greater than the actual fear of the person, I stepped back outside and looked around. But the man was gone. He was gone for good this time. Our shop has cameras, so they caught all of it. When my shift ended, I told my manager about what happened and showed her the video footage. She was shocked and kind of freaked out herself. I only worked there for another month after that, then moved on. One night driving home from work after a graveyard shift, I got a sudden urge to pee. Like, it was really bad. Painfully bad. I was driving down a quiet parkway with no other cars, so I figured I'd pull to the side real quick and pee in the woods. I put my hazards on just in case that off chance that a cop rolled by. After I finished, I got back in my truck and tried to start it. Instead, all I heard was the sickening sound of a car battery failing to start the engine. I tried at least 5 times before I gave up, not wanting to drain the battery anymore. I left my hazards on and stepped outside so I could be ready to wave someone down in hopes that they had jumper cables. When I did see headlights coming down the road, I went to the side of the road and started waving my arms. The car slowed down and went to pull over to the side behind my truck. As I started walking over to the car, the 2 front doors opened and 2 relatively big guys stepped out. I stopped in my tracks and thanked them for stopping, immediately asking if they had jumper cables. They looked at each other, then back at me, and the driver said, "Nah." The other guy asked, "You stuck?" I said, "Yeah, my battery died." The driver said to give him a sec, he'd call one of his boys. I didn't exactly know how I felt about that. Right away, I found the 2 a little off-putting. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I got gangster kind of vibes from them. The driver got back into his car after he got on the phone. I did the same. When I was sitting in my car, I couldn't help but feel I needed to call for my own help. I didn't know how much I trusted these 2. So I called my brother's phone a couple of times before he picked up. It was past midnight after all. I had woken him up with my call, but I told him I was stuck in an emergency and needed his help. I told him to bring jumper cables and to hurry up. He said he'd be over in a few. When I hung up, I got out from the car and waved my arms out to the car behind me. The driver opened his door and stepped out to look at me, and I called over that I had help on the way and it was cool. All he said was, "Aight then," and got back in his car. That feeling of danger suddenly exited my body, and I felt at ease. I leaned my seat back so I could relax in the meantime, but soon it came to me that I didn't hear their car pass by. I turned back and saw that their car was still there. It had been almost 5 minutes since I'd waved them off. I called my brother again, who said he just got in the car. I told him to floor it to me and have some weapons ready, because I was pretty sure I was about to be jumped. He said he had his baseball bat in the back seat as usual. Luckily, my truck was only about 5 minutes from our house, less if he stepped on it. I started to beat myself up for not just holding it in for another 5 minutes, then this wouldn't have happened. Finally, more headlights appeared coming up the parkway. The approaching car slowed and pulled up behind the car that was behind me. I got out from the car and started waving my arms again. But when I saw 2 of the car doors open, I had a feeling it wasn't my brother. The driver in the first car got out and greeted his apparent goons. They all started gradually making their way over to my truck as they talked loud and cursed at each other. I guess it's worth noting there were no jumper cables in any of their hands. I'm not a lucky person at all, but when I saw the familiar headlights of my brother's Mustang zooming down the parkway towards us, I felt as if my luck had turned around for once. He pulled up his car in front of my truck and he came out with his baseball bat. He pulled out another baseball bat from the back seat that he brought for me. He tossed it to me, and my brother, being the larger, more dominant one, said in a very loud, firm voice, we didn't want trouble and it's best they moved along and let us go about our business. They all backed up a little when they saw our bats. One of the guys laughed, another one said, "We ain't ever said we want no trouble." Upon examining the first car, I realized the guy who was in the passenger seat originally wasn't there anymore. I whispered to my brother to be wary, one of the men were missing. My brother got back in his car to bring his hood up in front of my hood. He fetched his cables and connected them to my battery. I kept watch of the 3 men who were lurking by their cars. Now we waited. My brother very softly called my name, and then low-key tilted his head in the direction of the woods. I looked into the woods, and saw the man who was originally in the passenger seat and was now hiding in the woods, looking as if he was about to do some kind of sneak-up attack. My brother told me to try the ignition. So, with one faithful turn of the key, the engine to my truck started. I got back out of the truck to literally guard my brother as he unplugged the cords from my battery and put them back in his car. We whispered to each other our plan, and that was for him to throw it in reverse as soon as we got in our cars, and I'd step on it back onto the road. After closing our hoods, we took one last look at the men huddled by the 3rd car, looking at us. Then we ran for our respective vehicles and stepped on the gas. My brother floored it in reverse. I waited to give him enough space before I floored it as well. As I did, I heard the shattering of my back windshield as a brick landed on my dash. Then I heard the distinct sounds of gunshots, which continued to shatter the remainder of my back windshield. I ducked down as low as I could get while still getting a view of the road. The 2 of us managed to flee the scene unharmed, and they didn't chase us. We went straight home to tell our 65-year-old dad, who claimed he was 100% sure we just had an encounter with a local gang. Our dad also told us not to take that specific parkway at night because it's not a safe road. I can only guess they wanted to rob me blind, and they didn't take too kindly to us waving bats in their faces. I've done a great deal of camping in my life, mostly solo camping out in the wilderness. Everyone who takes the hobby as seriously as me knows the potential dangers that come along with it. However, there was one thing that happened on a camping trip that I never anticipated. I was in my tent, which sat next to a small flowing river. My campfire was breathing its last breaths, and I was already laying in my sleeping bag trying to sleep. I started to hear something circling around my tent. At first, it started as big, heavy branches snapping in the distance. Then it turned to closer steps on the forest floor surrounding my tent. I ruled it out as being a bear or a larger animal because the footsteps didn't seem heavy enough. Plus, the fire would more often than not draw such animals away. To be safe, I still stayed inside the tent to refrain from making any noise. But the steps just kept circling around my tent. Finally, I called out, "Hello?" The steps didn't stop. Now I sat up, ready to take a quick look outside. I unzipped the tent and crawled outside. I still heard the footsteps, but now it seemed whatever was making the footsteps was being more cautious about moving around so loudly. I looked out into the darkness of the forest in the direction the steps were coming from, and very briefly I saw a light. Not just any kind of light, though. It was undeniably a phone screen. It turned off as quickly as it came on. Now I knew there was a person out there circling my campsite. I had already called to them and they didn't respond to me, so that was a very bad sign. Despite my experience in camping and wilderness, I'd never been stalked by a human before, and I wasn't comfortable there anymore. I have a license to carry a sidearm, however, and I always bring it with me when I go camping. I felt it was an appropriate time to pull that out from my bag. I started to pack my things as fast as possible. I can't begin to explain how scared I was as I packed up my sleeping bag and tent. I found myself turning around every few seconds to make sure someone wasn't sneaking up on me. Maybe I wouldn't have been so scared if the footsteps around my camp didn't keep going. When everything was packed, I didn't try to hide the fact that I was sprinting back to my car, which wasn't parked far away. I threw my stuff in the back seat and hopped in, locking the door first thing. I turned the car on, and as I put it in drive, the car started to wobble and shake, and I heard a terrible scraping noise. I stopped the car. A low tire pressure alert came on for all 4 tires, and I knew then that all 4 tires had been slashed by somebody. I couldn't possibly move that car without destroying my wheels, so I sat there in a pitch-black forest with the only light being from my headlights. I was afraid to look outside in any direction, for someone could be hidden, watching from any possible direction. I sat there for a few seconds with my whole body shaking. I finally grabbed my phone to call the police. At the same time, I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw someone standing at the trunk of my car. My heart was in my stomach at this point. I don't know how I didn't scream. I took a deep breath, grabbed the handgun sitting in the passenger seat, opened the door, and stepped out with aggression. I aimed the gun at the person standing at the back of my car, who raised his hands in the air. I screamed at him as loud and aggressively as I could to get the fuck away from my car. I wasn't bluffing, I was ready to shoot him. He backed away into the woods, and once I couldn't see him anymore, I got back in my car and called the police. I told them to come to the dirt parking area for the particular park I was camping in. They said a state trooper would be en route. I called my towing company in the meantime while waiting for the trooper to arrive, all while my body was still shaking and I was still cautiously checking my surroundings. I never appreciated seeing a police car more than when the trooper pulled into the small dirt lot with his lights on, and I finally felt safe to get out from my car. The tow truck came 20 minutes later, and my car was towed to a repair shop. I slept in my car overnight, and first thing in the morning, my tires were replaced. This never stopped me from continuing camping. My old Buick used to have issues with the gas gauge. The gauge was off, so sometimes I'd fill the tank completely and the needle on the gauge would still hover around the E, and sometimes when the tank was running low, the needle would sit around F. The needle seemed to decide when it wanted to work or not. Well, one night after coming back from a vacation and not driving for a week, I guess I had forgotten how long it had been since I'd filled up the tank, because the car ran out of gas on some quiet road in an even quieter town. I didn't want to call my girlfriend because she lived too far away, and I didn't want to be a bother. I got out from the car and looked around my surroundings. There was not much, except for trees on either side and a small house sitting atop a hill to the right of my car. So, that was my only option to go for help. I went up the hill to the house and rang the bell. It was 9:30, so it wasn't exactly too late to be ringing someone's bell in this kind of scenario. I waited patiently. There were lights on in the house after all. After a minute, I gave the bell one more ring, but I told myself that would be it. After waiting another minute, I accepted defeat and walked away from the door. As I went down the little walkway, I heard a weird noise that seemed to be coming from the side of the house, like the moaning and distressed breathing of someone in pain. It came from behind a line of bushes. Quite frankly, I didn't feel right snooping over there, so I continued back down the driveway. I did take a look back at the house, and noticed a light upstairs was on now that wasn't on before, and there was someone standing at the window. I could see their head and shoulders. I stared for a moment, expecting them to do something, like maybe come to the door. But they didn't move, and it got weird. So I continued back to my car. I leaned on my car door and called AAA, which was my roadside assistance company. They said they would deliver gas to me within half an hour. It was too hot out to sit in my car, so I stayed outside. I waited around texting people, checking Instagram, and pacing back and forth. When I heard a deep voice go, "Excuse me," my head shot up. There was a guy standing by the curb near the driveway to the house. He was wearing a hat really low and tilted his head down, hiding a lot of his face. He asked me if there was a problem. I said I ran out of gas right here. All he said in response was, "Oh." He turned and started walking back up the hill. Pretty soon he disappeared behind the bushes on his property. He seemed like a very creepy man based on that short interaction. I texted my girlfriend about the whole thing, and she said I should go see what that sound I was hearing behind the bushes was. I kind of wanted to be honest, so I snuck through the trees next to the guy's house up the hill and went to the side of the house where I heard the noises. I tiptoed up to the wall of the house and then stopped to listen. There were the moans and breathing again. They were coming from a window. I went to the window and tried to look inside, but the blind was down so I couldn't. The sounds were concerning though. I lightly tapped on the window and said, "Is everything okay?" I heard someone say in a faint, weak voice, "Help." I stood there thinking about what to do, when all of a sudden the blind kinked open, and I saw a face looking back at me through the window. I couldn't tell for sure, but it looked like the creepy man who came outside. The kink in the blind dropped back down shut, and then the window dropped closed so I couldn't hear anything else. I didn't care though. I ran back down to my car, got in, and locked the door. I waited until the AAA truck came, and when they filled my tank, I didn't say a word about what I just witnessed. I just went home and tried to get some sleep that night. I never wanted to see or think about that house again.
I used to be a janitor for a high school. It was a job that I only had for about a year, and this was back in 2019. The job was not too bad, but I moved on to other things later. For the most part, when I worked as a janitor, I would work overnights in the high school, and typically was all by myself. I would start at 9 o'clock at night and get off at 5 o'clock in the morning. The high school was large, but not so big that I couldn't manage it. With all that time and the whole place to myself, I could clean everything that I was supposed to. A few times, due to events on the school campus, there were some people there around the time I started, but they would usually be gone within an hour or two. I would do the things that you would expect: mop floors, vacuum, sweep, and maintain the bathrooms. Not every room in the school required attention daily, so it's not like I was cleaning every single classroom every night. I would even have some downtime where I would just go on my phone or whatever. It was honestly a decent job. The only downside was that I had to be nocturnal and work overnights and sleep during the day. The other downside was that I was all by myself all night in a school, which sometimes felt sort of creepy. Most of the lights would be off, and a lot of them were motion-detected lights, so they would turn on when I went near them. One night, I was working at a random hallway cleaning the floors. It was probably about midnight or 1 a.m. I remember that I thought I heard footsteps coming from not that far away. I looked over, but saw nothing. Now, the footsteps might not have been in my sight and come from around the corner. I walked over, wondering who was in here. As far as I knew, I was all by myself, like always. When I made it to the end of the hallway, I looked around, but saw nothing. I went back over to where I had been and continued work. Maybe I had just imagined it. I wasn't 100% sure because it hadn't been very loud. But probably 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps again. This time, I knew I was hearing it. I looked to the end of the hallway, and when I did, saw a man walking by. I only saw him for a couple of seconds because he walked past the hall to another. He was only visible for a short amount of time. I could tell that it was a man, though, and seemingly an adult. But beyond that, I couldn't really tell any details because he was kind of far away. I started walking over and called out, asking who was there. Nobody was supposed to be in the school at this time. Nobody answered me when I called out, though. When I got to the end of the hallway and looked, he was gone. There were other hallways that he could have gone down, though. I walked a little ways farther, looking around and asking if anybody was there. But I saw no one and didn't hear anything either. After that, I wasn't really sure what to do. I just ended up going back to work where I had been. Some time went by, and eventually I moved into another hallway. Probably 3 hours or so after the last time I saw the guy, something else happened. This time, I was facing the end of the hallway, and out of nowhere, I heard this noise behind me. I couldn't really tell what it was. I turned around and looked back, and saw a basketball rolling right in my direction. It went past me and hit a locker. When I looked up to where it had been rolling from, I didn't see anybody. I suspected that whoever was in the building stood at the end of the hallway that I was in and rolled the ball towards me. Then they moved away out of my sight, but why they did it, I had no idea. I picked up the ball and walked to the end of the hallway to where it had been rolled from. I called out once more, asking if anybody was there. Still, nobody answered me. I stood there in silence, looking around for like 5 minutes. I didn't see or hear anything at all. Somebody was messing with me, but I didn't know why. I mean, they weren't even supposed to be here in the first place. Once more, I went back to work. From that point on, I wasn't bothered again for the rest of my shift that day. Just before I was done, I decided to walk all around the school to look for the person. I went into every wing and hallway and asked if anybody was there in each one. I even checked all of the bathrooms, but nobody ever answered me, and I didn't see anyone either. At 5 o'clock in the morning, I got off, and another janitor got there. I told him about what had happened and asked him to keep an eye out for the guy. Then I left the school and drove home. During this time, I was living in a small house by myself, about 10 minutes away from the school. I got back, and my typical routine was to go to bed and get some sleep. It was strange to go to sleep at like 6 a.m., but I got used to it. So on this day, it was probably 5 minutes after I got back home, and I was in my kitchen. That's when I heard a knock on my front door. Instantly, I was confused. I walked over to the living room and looked out of the front window. Nobody was there. Just off in the distance, I saw a guy walking down the street. I saw him for just a second or two before he went out of my sight. It looked like the same guy who had been inside the school. I was so creeped out. I didn't fall asleep for hours. But luckily, the man never returned. And after that day, nothing like that happened in the school ever again either. I still wonder, though, who he was and what he was doing. One time, I was working in an office building. It was a pretty standard building with several floors and cubicles and stuff. The building was empty overnights as far as I knew, but I was only supposed to be working on the first floor. I was supposed to be cleaning the office area and vacuum the large amount of carpet that they had on that level, as well as cleaning some other things. This story takes place on probably my second week working there. To that point, it had been very easy. I was all by myself each night, and things were going smooth. I got my work done in plenty of time typically most nights. One random night though, it was 2 a.m. and I was changing one of the trash cans. Out of nowhere, I heard the sound of glass breaking. I had no idea what was going on for a few seconds. It was just so unexpected that my brain was trying to make sense of it. Soon though, I realized the obvious, that somebody must have broken in. That's when I realized that I might be in danger. The glass breaking sound came from a ways away. There were lots of cubicles and dividers and stuff, so whoever broke in was out of my sight. I wasn't sure what to do, so I got on the ground and crawled to a cubicle. I went inside, being as quiet as I could, and then I hid underneath a desk. What I heard then was footsteps moving a ways away, but inside. I obviously didn't know who had seemingly broken into the office building or why. The footsteps started moving closer to me. I was paranoid that they somehow knew I was in here or something. They were still a long ways away and seemed to slow down a little. It was at that moment when I finally had the thought to call the police, but it was so quiet in there other than the person walking that I was afraid to. If I so much as moved a muscle, I was scared the person would hear me. I was literally sitting there completely still and almost holding my breath. Whoever was in there seemed to stop and was still a ways away. I didn't hear much, but could tell that they were staying in the same area. This went on for about 2 or 3 minutes if I had to guess. Then they started to walk again and walk closer to me. For this time, they probably moved to within about 30 feet of me, and I got very nervous. I was just thinking that they might suddenly look under the desk. They stopped though, and I couldn't tell what they were doing. At that point, I really badly wanted to call the police. I just couldn't bring myself to do it though. I was convinced that if I moved at all to get my phone, the person would hear it. I reached for my pocket, but then stopped. It seemed like I was making too much noise. Then I just froze and held my breath, trying not to make a sound at all. The person remained where they were, doing who knows what. They stayed in that area for what felt like forever. I honestly don't know exactly how long it was. Maybe 5 minutes at most, but that's a long time for the situation that I was in. Finally, I heard them walking back in the direction that they came from. I continued to not move a muscle. They went pretty far away, and then I stopped hearing them at all. I wasn't sure if they had left or what. I waited for probably 5 more minutes without hearing them at all. That's when I finally determined that they must have left. I finally grabbed my phone and called the police. Still, I wasn't 100% sure that they were gone, so I spoke as quietly as I could. I was told that the police were on the way, and I remained hidden underneath the desk. In the time that I was waiting, I didn't hear any more noises at all. I was able to leave the area underneath the desk and was very sure that the person had gone. When I looked around, everything seemed to be in place. The police arrived next, and I told them what happened. One of the windows a ways away was in fact broken, but I had no clue if anything was stolen or not, because I didn't know everything that the office building had. Nothing that I was aware of was in any different place than before. After that, I was sent home because the police were going to stay there and do more investigating. I returned to work there several nights later to continue with my job. For the rest of the time that I worked there, I was nervous that something like that would happen again, but luckily there were no more break-ins. I'm not sure who exactly broke in that one night, and I never heard that much more about it. For a while, I worked as a janitor at a university. The college was about average sized, and there were several different buildings on campus. There were a few other janitors, and we would all have certain buildings that we were assigned to clean. That would change as well, so basically I would just do as I was told. When I worked, it would mostly be the afternoon into the night. I would get off at like 10 or 11 p.m. oftentimes. One night, I was working in one of the buildings that had classrooms in it. It was at the west end of campus, sort of on the edge. I got inside the building in the evening, after all the classes for the day were completed. There were still a few students around studying and such, but not very many. As the night went on, there would be less and less. Most of the time, things were very similar from one building to the other. I started cleaning some of the classrooms, and it would take me a while. By probably 9 o'clock at night, there was nobody there at all. I had cleaned quite a bit, and I was just going to finish in the building and then be done. I had about 2 classrooms left. Now, the building had several different hallways, lounge areas for studying, and then offices. I was making my way down one hallway when I heard footsteps up ahead in the distance. They were going to the direction of the classrooms I was going to be cleaning, and I was walking towards them. As I did, I saw a man walk into my view from around the hallway. Then he kept going. Soon he went out of my sight. I didn't think too much of it because he was a long ways ahead of me, and I assumed that he was just a student. It was unusual for people to be here so late, but he was probably just doing some late night studying. So I kept going to the classroom that I was going to work in, and I arrived about a minute or two later. When I opened the door and went inside, the lights were off. After turning them on, the room appeared to be completely empty. I had my cleaning cart with me with lots of supplies. I began taking some things and was going to start working. Out of nowhere, though, I heard a noise coming from my left. I looked over and saw that there was a man running towards me at full speed. It was the guy that I had seen just minutes earlier, and now he was aggressively charging me. I barely had any time to react. The only thing that I was able to do was move back and try to get to the door. As I was doing this, the man reached me. I felt him grabbing at my arm, and then he hit my back a little as I was moving away. Then he crashed into my cleaning cart, knocking it over, and the man fell over as well. I was able to get away from him and leave the classroom, but I could see that he was getting up to chase after me. I ran down the hallway and found a door that was a bathroom. I got inside quickly and then locked it. The man got there about 10 seconds later. Looking back, I should have tried to leave the building, but I wasn't very fast and thought that the man might catch me if I left. He tried opening the locked door and then started banging on it. Luckily, I had my cell phone on me and I dialed 911. As I got on the phone with the police, the man was still ruthlessly banging on the door. I didn't know what on earth his problem was. He continued to try to get in the door, and I didn't say anything at all. I was worried that the door would break, even though it was pretty strong. It seemed to be holding up pretty well, though. The man did not let up and continued. The more he hit it, the more the door seemed to shake. But I soon heard the sound of other people in the building, and I knew that it was the police. Before I knew it, they reached the man and stopped him from trying to get in. They left the building with him, and I came out to see several police officers standing around. I found out that the guy wasn't even a student at the university. I still don't know why he tried to attack me and then chased after me. I don't know what his problem was. Clearly, he was dangerous. He must have hidden the classroom, but I don't think he knew that I would go in there. Maybe he was mad at me for entering the room. I still don't know. But after that, I never had any experiences like that. I worked at that school for about another year, then I moved on. That was the most memorable moment from my time there.
It was almost a decade ago. I was in the Adirondack Mountains for a hiking and skiing trip. I rented an Airbnb cabin for the week, kind of nestled in its own private section of woods, perfect for skiers and hikers. Though there was news of an incoming blizzard all of a sudden one day that week. I wasn't just going to cut my trip 3 days short though, and I already paid for it. I think it was a Friday, I don't remember, but I woke up that morning to knocks at the front door of my cabin. I looked out the window in my bedroom, and I was greeted with nothing but white sheets of snow covering everything, with heavy snow still piling on. I looked to the front door, and there was this woman in a parka who looked rather distressed. I quickly threw on a change of clothes and opened the door. She was some 40-something-year-old woman. Her cheeks were red and she looked freezing. She asked, in I guess as polite way as possible, if she could seek shelter here until the storm blew over. I figured it was the gentleman thing to do, So I invited her in and told her to make herself comfortable while I heated up some coffee. She plopped herself down on the couch and asked if I lived here. I told her it was just an Airbnb, then asked where she was coming from. She said she also rented an Airbnb up here, but she got caught in the blizzard and couldn't find her way back. She said her name was Meredith. I handed her a cup of coffee, but she refused it and said she was really tired. Then she asked if she could just rest on the couch. I allowed it, though as I ate my breakfast. I can't lie, I felt really awkward. I didn't really know what to do after my breakfast. I didn't feel comfortable just hanging in the living room kitchen area, so I went back to my room to watch TV. The snow was really coming down outside, and the wind was so aggressive that the whistling shrieked through the windows. Not too long after, another knock at the door. I once again looked out the window. This time there was a man outside. I went to open the door, with Meredith now sitting up on the couch, asking who it was. I told her I don't know, then I opened the door. It was like deja vu because the man basically gave the same story, that he was caught in the blizzard and needed a place to stay. At this point, having already let Meredith in, I had to let him in too. I told him the same thing I told her, make yourself comfortable. He introduced himself as Mark. Meredith and Mark. They introduced themselves to each other as well, and they had a laugh at the fact that they were both in the same boat. Then they both kind of playfully praised me for letting them in. Meredith seemed more lively now, more open to conversation. So we talked about a bunch of random stuff until there was nothing really left to talk about. The day dragged on into the night. It grew dark and cold inside the cabin, and the snow was showing no signs of receding. I offered them whatever food was in the fridge throughout the day. Unfortunately for me, it seemed it was approaching that time that I had to designate where they would be sleeping. But Meredith kind of did that for me. She asked if I would allow the two of them to stay here for the night. I had to say yes. So they both slept on the couches. I slept in my room, of course. I fell asleep rather easily, with the knowledge that my belongings were under my bed and couldn't be easily stolen by these two strangers. I'm usually a heavy sleeper, but this night I woke up to a loud thump. I sat up. The door to my bedroom was open, and the sound of the outside wind was incredibly loud. I discovered the front door to the cabin was open too, and neither Meredith nor Mark were on the couch. I went out to the porch for a second, just to look into the woods. There were fresh-looking footsteps leading into the snow, and I could see Meredith just standing out there in the snow, facing me, holding what looked to be my travel bag. I yelled at her to come back here, along with a few choice words. I ran to my room to get my boots. As I rushed to put the boots on while on the couch, I noticed my bedroom door was now shut. I 100% did not close that door. Was I about to open it? Hell no. Especially not after I heard footsteps on the other side of the door. I got my boots and coat on and ran to the front porch again. But now Meredith wasn't alone. Someone, a man, I couldn't tell if it was Mark or not, was standing next to her, holding her hand, and they were both facing the house. I didn't care about the bag anymore. I ran to my Jeep and drove through the 3 feet of snow. There had to be more than just those two people in the house that night, because someone else was in the bedroom. I was too nice. I let my guard down with 2 strangers, and I paid the price. I'm just happy they didn't kill me though. Somehow I got the vibe they were trying to do more than just rob me of my bag. My older brother and I used to love to play out in the snow. We live by the woods. I'm not giving my town or state or any other details of our location though. One night our parents let us go outside to play in the blizzard. We figured playing hide and seek would be fun since the footprints in the snow would create a new factor in the game. So I was the one hiding first. We were playing in the woods with flashlights. I turned mine off once I found a place to hide, just to not give away my location. I ducked down in the deep snow between 2 big trees. I tried covering my tracks in the snow, but I couldn't possibly get all of them. I saw my brother's flashlight in the distance, coming in my direction. He was definitely going to find me, so I ran in the dark deeper into the woods. I definitely lost him because I didn't see his light anymore, or maybe he turned it off. Also, we knew these woods, and I knew which direction I was going. I wasn't going to get lost. Eventually, as I kept walking though, I found another trail of footprints. They seemed like they were left there only a few minutes ago, so I started following them, expecting to find a deer at the end. As the footprints became more fresh, however, I started to realize they were boot prints, not animal footprints. This also meant I was getting closer to whoever just left these boot prints. I was thinking at first that it was my brother. Maybe he ran past me without me hearing it. I only thought that because I didn't see how or why anyone else would be out here in the middle of a blizzard. With my lights still on, I noticed something black sticking out of this big pile of snow, which seemed to sit right next to the boot marks. I stopped and examined it, and brushed some of the snow off the object. I brushed enough snow off to realize it was a big black garbage bag. This didn't look good. I already smelled something foul in there. Garbage? That's what I was hoping for. I tried to find the opening of the bag, and eventually just gave up and tore the bag open with my nails. I gagged the instant I saw what was inside. A decomposing human body. When I say gagged, I'm talking coughing loudly and uncontrollably in shock and disgust, and I think that gave away my position to my brother, because pretty soon his light started shining on me. I turned to him, his light in my face, and made a hand motion signaling for him to run, like go home. Rightfully so, he was confused and kept approaching me, so I ran to him and told him to turn off his flashlight. I pointed at the bag and whispered what was inside. He didn't believe me, even after I begged him to just go home with me. He went to the bag to see for himself, and when he saw I wasn't lying, he put his hand over his mouth. As the older brother, he started guiding me and nudging me back to the house, trying not to make a sound. Though, as we moved, we kept looking back, thinking we heard footsteps in the snow behind us. We moved faster every time. He had to keep the flashlight on, otherwise it would be pitch black. Then, I think at the same time, we both looked back after hearing a footstep again, and saw about 50 feet away or so, there was someone standing there, right in the light of my brother's flashlight, watching. From there, we ran all the way back home. The man yelled something at us, but neither of us could make out what he said. We got back to the house 2 minutes later and told our parents, who called the police to report the dead body. The police came and asked us a bunch of questions, and they sent out a search team based on our description of the location. They didn't make us go back out there. The search turned up no results, but they resumed the next day in the daylight, which was when we were asked for assistance in retracing our steps. We did the best we could, but the body was never found. It wouldn't be much of a surprise if whoever was out there moved the body after realizing there were 2 witnesses. We were literally just little kids when this happened, and we were still being followed by possibly the person who hid that body there to begin with. I still wonder if we just narrowly escaped with our lives. It started on the night of the first snowstorm of the year. I was off the next day for work, so I was just relaxing in my bed watching a movie, drinking hot cocoa. All of a sudden, something hit my window that nearly gave me a heart attack. I looked at my window and saw the fresh mark of a snowball having just splattered over the glass. I opened the window to look outside, and I heard a kid's laughter. Well, that answered that. I closed the window again, and my attention shifted back to the movie. Not too long before, a second pow at the window, followed by the kid's laughter. This time I ignored it. I knew that by giving the kid a reaction, they would keep going. Apparently that worked, because no more snowballs were thrown at my window that night. The next night, though, it happened again, this time while I was asleep. I woke up to a much louder and more ferocious bang at the window from a snowball. I opened the window and took a look outside. Though it wasn't snowing anymore, I still couldn't see too far out onto the lawn, though I did hear the laughing of the kid again. It was a boy's laughter. It sounded like a 10-year-old. I yelled something out the window at him. I think it was a threat, but nothing too serious to be directed at a child. It didn't happen again that night. The next day, a lot of the snow had melted, but most of the ground was still covered in a white sheet. After turning off my light in my room, I lay awake, anticipating and dreading the sound of a snowball hitting the glass that would once again make me jump out of my skin. And just like clockwork, it happened. That goddamn kid was back. I was ready this time. I jumped out of bed and looked out the window. This time, I saw just for maybe half a second the back of a kid running away into the darkness. I threw on my shoes and coat and ran outside to find him. I found where his footsteps started at my window, and I followed them. I ran as fast as I could, trying to catch up to him. His footprints led me down a grass field until I reached a road. The footprints stopped at a big sycamore tree. Wrapped around it were 2 white bands of flowers. There was also a wooden cross planted in front of the tree. It was a memorial for a fatal car crash here. I double and then triple checked to see if the footsteps went any other direction, but they mysteriously stopped right there. I walked back home and went to bed, a bit disturbed. The next day I did some research and inquired with some locals, and I found out a mother and her son died in a car crash running into that tree. When I learned this, I got goosebumps, but I didn't want to find out how old the son was. I couldn't bring myself to do it. God forbid the son was around 10 years old. I'd forever be haunted by this, even more so than I already am. The next night, I thought I heard a child's laughter outside my window, but it may have just been my imagination running wild. I had to take sleeping pills for a whole month, just so that I wouldn't be awake terrified all night.